Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. How to Lose Your Mind and Create a New One. By Dr. Joe Dispensa, New York Times best-selling author of You Are the Placebo, dedicated to Roby. Read by Adam Boyce. Copyright 2012 by Joe Dispensa. Introduction. The greatest habit you can ever break is the habit of being yourself. When I think about all the books on creating the life we desire, I realize that many of us are still looking for approaches that are grounded in sound scientific evidence, methods that truly work. But already, new research into the brain and body, the mind and consciousness, and a quantum leap in our understanding of physics is suggesting expanded possibilities on how to move toward what we innately know is our real potential. As a practicing chiropractor who runs a busy, integrated health clinic, and as an educator in the fields of neuroscience, brain function, biology, and brain chemistry, I have been privileged to be on the forefront of some of this research, not just by studying the fields mentioned above, but also by observing the effects of this new science once applied by common people like you and me. That's the moment when the possibilities of this new science become reality. As a consequence, I have witnessed some remarkable changes in individuals' health and quality of life when they truly change their minds. Over the last several years, I've had the opportunity to interview a host of people who overcame significant health conditions that were considered either terminal or permanent. Per the contemporary model of medicine, these recoveries were labeled spontaneous remissions. However, upon my extensive examination of their inner journeys, it became apparent to me that there was a strong element of mind involved, and their physical changes weren't so spontaneous after all. This discovery furthered my postgraduate studies in brain imaging, neuroplasticity, epigenetics, and psychoneuroimmunology. I simply figured that something had to be happening in the brain and body that could be zeroed in on and then replicated. In this book, I want to share some of what I learned along the way and show you, by exploring how mind and matter are interrelated, how you can apply these principles not only to your body, but to any aspect of your life. Many readers of my first book, Evolve Your Brain, The Science of Changing Your Mind, voiced the same honest and heartfelt request, along with a fair amount of positive feedback, such as the person who wrote, "I really liked your book. I read it twice. It had lots of science and was very thorough and inspiring. But can you tell me how to do it? How do I evolve my brain?" In response, I began teaching a workshop series on the practical steps anyone can take to make changes at the level of mind and body that will lead to lasting results. Consequently, I have seen people experience unexplainable healings, release old mental and emotional wounds, resolve so-called impossible difficulties, create new opportunities, and experience wonderful wealth, just to name a few. You will meet some of those people in these pages. It's not necessary that you read my first book to digest the material in this one, but if you have been exposed to my work, I wrote Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself to serve as a practical, how-to companion to evolve your brain. It is my earnest objective to make this new book simple and easy to understand. There will be times, though, that I will have to give you bits of knowledge to act as the forerunner to a concept I want to develop. The purpose is to build a realistic working model of personal transformation that will help you understand how we can change. Breaking the habit of being yourself is a product of one of my passions, a sincere effort to demystify the mystical, so that every person understands that we have within our reach all we need to make significant changes in our lives. This is a time when not only do we want to know, but we want to know how. How do we apply and personalize both emerging scientific concepts and age-old wisdom to succeed at living a more enriched life? When you and I can connect the dots of what science is discovering about the nature of reality, and when we give ourselves permission to apply those principles in our day-to-day existence, then each of us becomes both a mystic and a scientist in our own life. So I invite you to experiment with everything that you learn in this book and to objectively observe the results. What I mean is that if you make the effort to change your inner world of thoughts and feelings, your external environment should begin to give you feedback to show you that your mind has had an effect on your outer world. Why else would you do it? If you take intellectual information that you learn as a philosophy and then initiate that knowledge into your life by applying it enough times until you master it, you will ultimately move from being a philosopher to an initiate to a master. Stay tuned. There is sound scientific evidence that this is possible. I do ask you up front to keep an open mind so that we can build step by step the concepts I outline in this book. All of this information is for you to do something with. Otherwise, it's just good dinner conversation, isn't it? Once you can open your mind to the way things really are and let go of your conditioned beliefs with which you are accustomed to framing reality, you should see the fruits of your efforts. That is my wish for you. The information in these pages is there to inspire you, to prove to yourself that you are a divine creator. We should never wait for science to give us permission to do the uncommon. If we do, then we are turning science into another religion. We should be brave enough to contemplate our lives, do what we thought was outside the box, and do it repeatedly. When we do that, we are on our way to a greater level of personal power. True empowerment comes when we start to look deeply at our beliefs. We may find their roots in the conditioning of religion, culture, society, education, family, the media, and even our genes, the latter being imprinted by the sensory experiences of our current lives, as well as untold generations. Then we weigh those old ideas against some new paradigms that may serve us better. Times are changing. As individuals awaken to a greater reality, we are part of a much larger sea change. Our current systems and models of reality are breaking down, and it is time for something new to emerge. Across the board, our models for politics, economics, religion, science, education, medicine, and our relationship with the environment are all showing a different landscape than just 10 years ago. Letting go of the outmoded and embracing the new sounds easy. But as I pointed out in Evolve Your Brain, much of what we have learned and experienced has been incorporated into our biological self, and we wear it like a garment. But we also know that what is true today might not be true tomorrow. Just as we have come to question our perception of atoms as solid pieces of matter, reality and our interaction with it is a progression of ideas and beliefs. We also know that to leave the familiar life that we have grown accustomed to and waltz into something new is like a salmon swimming upstream. It takes effort, and frankly, it's uncomfortable. And to top it off, ridicule, marginalization, opposition and denigration from those who cling to what they think they know greet us along the way. Who with such an unconventional bent is willing to meet such adversity in the name of some concept they cannot embrace with their senses, yet which is alive in their minds? How many times in history have individuals who were considered heretics and fools, and thus took the abuse of the unexceptional, emerged as geniuses, saints, or masters? Will you dare to be an original? It seems that human nature is such that we balk at changing until things get really bad, and we're so uncomfortable that we can no longer go on with business as usual. This is as true for an individual as it is for a society. We wait for crisis, trauma, loss, disease, and tragedy before we get down to looking at who we are, what we're doing, how we're living, what we're feeling, and what we believe or know in order to embrace true change. Often it takes a worst-case scenario for us to begin making changes that support our health, relationships, career, family, and future. My message is, why wait? We can learn and change in a state of pain and suffering, or we can evolve in a state of joy and inspiration. Most embrace the former. To go with the latter, we just have to make up our minds that change will probably entail a bit of discomfort, some inconvenience, a break from a predictable routine, and a period of not knowing. Most of us are already familiar with the temporary discomfort of not knowing. We stumbled through our early efforts to read until this skill became second nature. When we first practiced the violin or the drums, our parents wished they could send us to a soundproof room. Pity the hapless patient who has his blood drawn by a medical student who has the requisite knowledge but still lacks the finesse that she will only gain through practice. Absorbing knowledge, knowing, and then gaining practical experience by applying what you learned until a particular skill becomes ingrained in you, knowing how, is probably how you acquired most of the abilities that now feel like part of your being, knowingness. In much the same way, learning how to change your life involves knowledge and the application of that knowledge. That is why this book is divided into 3 overarching sections. Throughout parts 1 and 2, I will build ideas in sequence, forming a bigger and broader model of understanding for you to personalize. If some ideas seem repetitive, they are there to remind you about something I don't want you to forget. Repetition reinforces the circuits in your brain and forms more neural connections, so that in your weakest hour, you don't talk yourself out of greatness. When you ease into part 3 of the book with a sound knowledge base, you can experience for yourself the truth of what you learned earlier. Part 1. The Science of You. Our exploration will start with an overview of philosophical and scientific paradigms related to the latest research about the nature of reality, who you are, why change has been so difficult for so many, and what is possible for you as a human being. Part 1 will be an easy read, I promise. Chapter 1. The Quantum You introduces you to a bit of quantum physics. But don't be alarmed. I start there because it is important that you begin to embrace the concept that your subjective mind has an effect on your objective world. The observer effect in quantum physics states that where you direct your attention is where you place your energy. As a consequence, you affect the material world, which, by the way, is made mostly of energy. If you entertain that idea even for a moment, you might start focusing on what you want instead of what you don't want. And you might even find yourself thinking, if an atom is 99.99999% energy and 0.00001% physical substance, then I'm actually more nothing than something. So why do I keep my attention on that small percentage of the physical world when I'm so much more? Is defining my present reality by what I perceive with my senses the biggest limitation I have? In Chapter 2 through 4, we will look at what it means to change, to become greater than the environment, the body and time. You've probably entertained the idea that your thoughts create your life, but in Chapter 2, Overcoming the Environment, I discuss how if you allow the outer world to control how you think and feel, your external environment is patterning circuits in your brain to make you think equal to everything familiar to you. The result is that you create more of the same. You hardwire your brain to reflect the problems, personal conditions and circumstances in your life. So to change, you must be greater than all the things in your physical life. Chapter 3, Overcoming the Body, continues to look at how we unconsciously live by a set of memorized behaviors, thoughts and emotional reactions, all running like computer programs behind the scenes of our conscious awareness. That's why it is not enough to think positive, because most of who we are might reside subconsciously as negativity in the body. By the end of this book, you will know how to enter into the operating system of the subconscious mind and make permanent changes where those programs exist. Chapter 4, Overcoming Time, examines how we either live in the anticipation of future events or repeatedly revisit past memories, or both, until the body begins to believe it is living in a time other than the present moment. The latest research supports the notion that we have a natural ability to change the brain and body by thought alone, so that it looks biologically like some future event has already happened. Because you can make thought more real than anything else, you can change who you are from brain cell to gene, given the right understanding. When you learn how to use your attention and access the present, you will enter through the door to the quantum field, where all potentials exist. Chapter 5, Survival versus Creation, illustrates the distinction between living in survival and living in creation. Living in survival entails living in stress and functioning as a materialist, believing that the outer world is more real than the inner world. When you are under the gun of the fight or flight nervous system, being run by its cocktail of intoxicating chemicals, you are programmed to be concerned only about your body, the things or people in your environment, and your obsession with time. Your brain and body are out of balance. You are living a predictable life. However, when you are truly living in the elegant state of creation, you are no body, no thing, no time. You forget about yourself. You become pure consciousness, free from the chains of the identity that needs the outer reality to remember who it thinks it is. Part 2, Your Brain and Meditation. In Chapter 6, 3 Brains, Thinking to Doing to Being, you will embrace the concept that you have 3 brains that allow you to move from thinking to doing to being. Even better, when you focus your attention to the exclusion of your environment, your body and time, you can easily move from thinking to being without having to do anything. In that state of mind, your brain does not distinguish between what is happening in the outer world of reality and what is happening in the inner world of your mind. Thus, if you can mentally rehearse a desired experience via thought alone, you will experience the emotions of that event before it is physically manifested. Now you are moving into a new state of being because your mind and body are working as one. When you begin to feel like some potential future reality is happening to you in the moment that you are focusing on it, you are rewriting your automatic habits, attitudes, and other unwanted subconscious programs. Chapter 7, The Gap, explores how to break free from the emotions that you've memorized, which have become your personality, and how to close the gap between who you really are in your inner private world and how you appear in the outer social world. We all reach a certain point when we stop learning and realize that nothing external can take away those feelings from our past. If you can predict the feeling of every experience in your life, there is no room for anything new to occur, because you are viewing your life from the past instead of the future. This is the juncture point where the soul either breaks free or falls into oblivion. You will learn to liberate your energy in the form of emotions and thus narrow the gap between how you appear and who you are. Ultimately, you will create transparency. When how you appear is who you are truly free. Part 2 concludes with Chapter 8, Meditation, Demystifying the Mystical and Waves of Your Future, in which my purpose is to demystify meditation so that you know what you're doing and why. Discussing brainwave technology made simple, I show you how your brain changes electromagnetically when you are focused versus when you are in an aroused state due to stresses in your life. You will learn that the true purpose of meditation is to get beyond the analytical mind and enter into the subconscious mind so that you can make real and permanent changes. If you get up from meditation as the same person who sat down, nothing has happened to you on any level. When you meditate and connect to something greater, you can create and then memorize such coherence between your thoughts and feelings that nothing in your outer reality, no thing, no person, no condition at any time or place, could move you from that level of energy. Now you are mastering your environment, your body and time. Part 3. Stepping towards your new destiny. All the information in Parts 1 and 2 is provided in order to equip you with the necessary knowledge, so that when you demonstrate, apply this information in Part 3, which supplies the how-to, you will have a direct experience of what you've been taught. Part 3 is all about applying yourself in an actual discipline, a mindful exercise to use in your daily life. It's a step-by-step meditation process created so that you can actually do something with the theories given to you. By the way, did your mind balk when I mentioned that multi-step process? If so, it's not what you think. Yes, you will learn a sequence of actions, but soon you will experience them as 1 or 2 simple steps. After all, you probably perform multiple actions every time you prepare to drive your car. For example, you adjust the seat, put on your seat belt, check the mirrors, start the car, turn on the headlights, look around, use a turn signal, apply the brake, put the car in drive or reverse, apply pressure to the gas pedal, and so on. Ever since you learned to drive, you have executed this procedure easily and automatically. I assure you, the same will be true once you learn each step in Part 3. You may be asking yourself, why do I need to read Parts 1 and 2? I'll just jump to Part 3. I know I'd probably be thinking the same. I decided to offer the relevant knowledge in the first 2 parts of the text so that when you get to the 3rd section, nothing will be left to conjecture, dogma, or speculation. When you begin the steps of the meditation, you'll know exactly what you're doing and why. When you comprehend the what and the why, the more you will know, and thus the more you will know how when the time comes. Therefore, you will have more power and intention behind the practical experience of truly changing your mind. By using the steps in Part 3, you may be more prone to accept your innate ability to change so-called impossible situations in your life. You might even give yourself permission to entertain potential realities you never considered prior to your exposure to these new concepts. You might just begin to do the uncommon. That is my aim for you by the time you finish this book. So if you can resist the temptation to jump ahead to Part 3, I promise that when you get there, you'll be quite empowered by what you learn. I've seen this approach work throughout the world in the series of 3 workshops I lead. When people gain the right knowledge in such a way that they understand it completely, and then have the opportunity for effective instruction to apply what they comprehend, then, like magic, they can see the fruits of their efforts in the form of changes that serve as feedback in their lives. Part 3 will give you the meditative skills to change something within your mind and body and to produce an effect outside of you. Once you can notice what you did inside of you that produced an outcome outside of you, you'll do it again. When a new experience manifests in your life, you'll embrace the energy you feel in the form of an elevated emotion, such as empowerment, awe, or immense gratitude, and that energy will drive you to do it again and again. Now you are on the path to true evolution. Each meditation step delineated in Part 3 is associated with a piece of meaningful information presented earlier in the book. Because you will have cultivated the meaning behind exactly what you're doing, there should be no ambiguity that might cause you to lose your vision. Like many skills you've learned, in the beginning it may take all of your conscious effort to stay focused as you learn how to meditate to evolve your brain. In the process, you must restrain yourself from the typical behaviors and maintain your thoughts on what you're doing without wandering to extraneous stimuli so your actions are aligned with your intention. Just as you might have experienced when you first learned to cook Thai food, play golf, dance the salsa, or drive a stick shift, the newness of the endeavor will require you to practice this ability continually, training both mind and body to memorize each step. Remember, most types of instruction are formatted in bite-sized chunks so that the mind and body can begin to work together. Once you get it, all of the individual steps you kept reviewing merge into one smooth process. The methodical, linear approach seamlessly flows into a holistic, effortless, unified demonstration. This is the point of personal ownership. At times, the effort this takes can be tedious, but if you persist with a certain amount of will and energy, in time you'll enjoy the results. When you know that you know how to do something, you're on your way to mastering it. I'm overjoyed to say that many people around the world are already using the knowledge in this book to make demonstrable changes in their lives. It is my sincere passion that you, too, break the habit of being yourself and create the new life you desire. Let's get started. Part 1. The Science of You. Chapter 1. The Quantum You. Early physicists divided the world into matter and thought, and later, matter and energy. Each member of those pairs was considered to be entirely separate from the other, but they're not. Nevertheless, this mind-matter duality shaped our early worldview, that reality was essentially predetermined, and that people could do little to change things through their own actions, let alone their thoughts. Fast forward to our current understanding, that we are part of a vast, invisible field of energy which contains all possible realities and responds to our thoughts and our feelings. Just as today's scientists are exploring the relationship between thought and matter, we're eager to do the same in our own lives. And so we ask ourselves, can I use my mind to create my reality? If so, is that a skill that we can learn and use to become who we want to be and to create the life we want to experience? Let's face it, none of us is perfect. Whether we'd like to make some change to our physical self, emotional self, or spiritual self, we all have the same desire. We want to live life as an idealized version of who we think and believe we can be. When we stand in front of the mirror and look at our love handles, we don't just see that slightly too pudgy vision reflected in the glass. We also see, depending on our mood that day, a slimmer, fitter version of ourselves, or a heavier, chunkier version. Which of our images is real? When we lie in bed at night reviewing our day and our efforts to be a more tolerant, less reactive person. We don't just see the parent who lashed out at our child for failing to quietly and quickly submit to a simple request. We envision either an angelic self whose patience was stretched like an innocent victim on the rack, or a hideous ogre laying waste to a child's self-esteem. Which of those images is real? The answer is, all of them are real. And not just those extremes, but an infinite spectrum of images ranging from positive to negative. How can that be? For you to better understand why none of those versions of self is more or less real than the others, I'm going to have to shatter the outmoded understanding about the fundamental nature of reality and replace it with a new one. That sounds like a major undertaking, and in some ways it is. But I also know this. The most likely reason why you were drawn to this book is that your past efforts to make any lasting change in your life, physical, emotional, or spiritual, have fallen short of the ideal of yourself that you imagined. And why those efforts failed has more to do with your beliefs about why your life is the way it is than anything else, including a perceived lack of will, time, courage, or imagination. Always, in order to change, we have to come to a new understanding of self and the world so that we can embrace new knowledge and have new experiences. That's what reading this book will do for you. Your past shortfalls can be traced at their root to one major oversight. You haven't committed yourself to living by the truth that your thoughts have consequences so great that they create your reality. The fact is that we are all blessed. We can all reap the benefits of our constructive efforts. We don't have to settle for our present reality. We can create a new one whenever we choose to. We all have that ability because, for better or worse, our thoughts do influence our lives. I'm sure you've heard that before, but I wonder whether most people really believe this statement on a gut level. If we truly embrace the notion that our thoughts produce tangible effects in our lives, wouldn't we strive to never let one thought slip by us that we didn't want to experience? And wouldn't we focus our attention on what we want instead of continually obsessing about our problems? Think about it. If you really knew that this principle were true, would you ever miss a day in intentionally creating your desired destiny? I hope this book will shift your view on how our world operates, convince you that you are more powerful than you knew, and inspire you to demonstrate the understanding that what you think and believe has a profound effect on your world. Until you break from the way you see your present reality, any change in your life will always be haphazard and transitory. You have to overhaul your thinking about why things happen in order to produce enduring and desired outcomes. To do that, you'll need to be open to a new interpretation of what is real and true. To help you shift into this mode of thought and begin to create a life of your choosing, I have to begin with a bit of cosmology, the study of the structure and dynamics of the universe. But don't be alarmed. We're merely going to skim through the Nature of Reality 101 and how some of our views about it have evolved to reach our present understanding. All of this is to explain, of necessity, in a brief and simple way, how it is possible that your thoughts shape your destiny. This chapter might test your willingness to abandon ideas that have in a sense been programmed into you for many years on a conscious and subconscious level. Once you gain a new conception of the fundamental forces and elements that constitute reality, it won't fit into that old perception in which the linear and the orderly rule the day. Be prepared to experience some fundamental shifts in understanding. In fact, as you begin to embrace this new outlook, your very makeup as a human being will change. It's my wish that you will no longer be the same person that you were when you began. Obviously, I'm about to challenge you, but I want you to know that I'm entirely empathetic because I too have had to let go of what I thought was true and leap into the unknown. To ease into this new way of thinking about the nature of our world, let's see how our worldview was shaped by the early belief that mind and matter were separate things. Connecting the dots between the outer physical world of the observable and the inner mental world of thought has always presented quite a challenge to scientists and philosophers. To many of us, even today, mind appears to have little or no measurable effects on the world of matter. Although we'd probably agree that the world of matter creates consequences affecting our minds, how can our minds possibly produce any physical changes affecting the solid things in our lives? Mind and matter appear to be separate. That is, unless there's a shift in our understanding about the way physical, solid things actually exist. Well, there has been such a shift, and to trace its beginnings we don't have to go back very far. For much of what historians consider modern times, humanity believed that the nature of the universe was orderly, and thus predictable and explainable. Consider 17th century mathematician and philosopher René Descartes, who developed many concepts that still have great relevance to mathematics and other fields. Does "I think, therefore I am" ring any bells? In retrospect, however, one of his theories ultimately did more harm than good. Descartes was a proponent of the mechanistic model of the universe, a view that the universe is controlled by predictable laws. When it came to human thought, Descartes faced a real challenge. The human mind possessed too many variables to neatly fit into any laws. Since he couldn't unify his understanding of the physical world with that of the mind, but he had to account for the presence of both, Descartes played a nifty mind game, pun intended. He said that the mind was not subject to the laws of the objective physical world, so it was completely outside the bounds of scientific inquiry. The study of matter was the jurisdiction of science. Always matter, never mind. Whereas the mind was God's instrument, so the study of it fell to religion. Always mind, never matter. Essentially, Descartes started a belief system that imposed a duality between the concepts of mind and matter. For centuries, that division stood as the accepted understanding of the nature of reality. Helping to perpetuate Descartes' beliefs were the experiments and theories of Sir Isaac Newton. The English mathematician and scientist not only solidified the concept of the universe as a machine, but he produced a set of laws stating that human beings could precisely determine, calculate, and predict the orderly ways in which the physical world would operate. According to the classical Newtonian physics model, all things were considered solid. For example, energy could be explained as a force to move objects or to change the physical state of matter. But as you will see, energy is much more than an outside force exerted on material things. Energy is the very fabric of all things material and is responsive to mind. By extension, the work of Descartes and Newton established a mindset that if reality operated on mechanistic principles, then humanity had little influence on outcomes. All of reality was predetermined. Given that outlook, is it any wonder that human beings struggle with the idea that their actions mattered, let alone entertain the notions that their thoughts mattered, or that free will played any part in the grand scheme of things? Don't many of us still labor today, subconsciously or consciously, under the assumption that we human beings are often little more than victims? Considering that these cherished beliefs held sway for centuries, it took some revolutionary thought to counter Descartes and Newton. About 200 years after Newton, Albert Einstein produced his famous equation, E equals mc squared, demonstrating that energy and matter are so fundamentally related that they are one and the same. Essentially, his work showed that matter and energy are completely interchangeable. This directly contradicted Newton and Descartes, and ushered in a new understanding of how the universe functions. Einstein didn't single-handedly crumble our previous view of the nature of reality, but he did undermine its foundation, and that eventually led to the collapse of some of our narrow, rigid ways of thinking. His theories set off an exploration of the puzzling behavior of light. Scientists then observed that light sometimes behaves like a wave, when it bends around a corner, for example, and at other times it behaves like a particle. How could life be both a wave and a particle? According to the outlook of Descartes and Newton, it couldn't. A phenomena had to be either one or the other. Quickly it became clear that the dualistic Cartesian Newtonian model was flawed at the most basic level of all, the subatomic. Subatomic refers to the parts, electrons, protons, neutrons, and so on, that make up atoms, which are the building blocks of all things physical. The most fundamental components of our so-called physical world are both waves, energy, and particles, physical matter, depending on the mind of the observer. And we'll come back to that. To understand how the world works, we had to look to its tiniest components. Thus, out of these particular experiments, a new field of science was born called quantum physics. This change was a complete reimagining of the world we'd thought we'd lived in, and it led to the proverbial rug being pulled out from under our feet. Feet we used to think were planted on solid ground. How so? Well, think back to those old toothpick and styrofoam ball models of the atom. Before quantum physics came along, people believed that an atom was made of a relatively solid nucleus, with smaller, less substantial objects either located in or around it. The very idea that with a powerful enough instrument we could measure, calculate the mass of, and count, number, the subatomic particles that make up an atom, made them seem as inert as cows grazing in a pasture. Atoms seem to be made of solid stuff, right? Refer to Figure 1a, the classical atom. Well, nothing could be further from the truth as revealed by the quantum model. Atoms are mostly empty space. Atoms are energy. Think about this. Everything physical in your life is not solid matter. Rather, it's all fields of energy or frequency patterns of information. All matter is more no-thing, energy, than something, particles. Refer to Figure 1b, the quantum atom. Refer to Figure 1c, the real quantum atom. But this alone wasn't enough to explain the nature of reality. Einstein and others had another puzzle to solve. Matter didn't always seem to behave in the same ways. When physicists began observing and measuring the tiny world of the atom, they noticed that at the subatomic level, the fundamental elements of the atom didn't obey the laws of classical physics the way that larger objects did. Events involving objects in the large world were predictable, reproducible, and consistent. When that legendary apple fell from a tree and moved towards the center of the earth until it collided with Newton's head, its mass accelerated with a consistent force. But electrons, as particles, behaved in unpredictable, unusual ways. When they interacted with the nucleus of the atom and moved towards its center, they gained and lost energy, appeared and disappeared, and seemed to show up all over the place without regard to the boundaries of time and space. Did the world of the small and the world of the large operate under very different sets of rules? Since subatomic particles like electrons were the building blocks of everything in nature, how could they be subject to one set of rules, and the things they made up behave according to another set of rules? At the level of the electron, scientists can measure energy-dependent characteristics such as wavelength, voltage potentials, and the like. But these particles have a mass that is so infinitesimally small and exists so temporarily as to be almost non-existent. This is what makes the subatomic world unique. It possesses not just physical qualities, but also energetic qualities. In truth, matter on a subatomic level exists as a momentary phenomenon. It's so elusive that it constantly appears and disappears, appearing into 3 dimensions and disappearing into nothing, into the quantum field, in no space, no time, transforming from particle, matter, to wave, energy, and vice versa. But where do particles go when they vanish into thin air? Refer Figure 1D, collapsing the wave function. Consider again that old-school toothpick and styrofoam ball model on how atoms were constructed. Back then, weren't we led to believe that electrons orbited about the nucleus like planets around the sun? If so, we could pinpoint their location, couldn't we? The answer is yes, in a manner of speaking, but the reason is not at all what we used to think. What quantum physicists discovered was that the person observing or measuring the tiny particles that make up atoms affects the behavior of energy and matter. Quantum experiments demonstrated that electrons exist simultaneously in an infinite array of possibilities, or probabilities, in an invisible field of energy. But only when an observer focuses attention on any location of any one electron does that electron appear. In other words, a particle cannot manifest in reality, that is, ordinary time-space as we know it, until we observe it. Quantum physics calls this phenomena collapse of the wave function, or the observer effect. We now know that the moment the observer looks for an electron, there is a specific point in time and space when all probabilities of the electron collapse into a physical event. With this discovery, mind and matter can no longer be considered separate. They are intrinsically related, because subjective mind produces measurable changes on the objective physical world. Are you beginning to see why this chapter is titled The Quantum You? At the subatomic level, energy responds to your mindful attention and becomes matter. How would your life change if you learned to direct the observer effect and to collapse infinite waves of probability into the reality that you choose? Could you get better at observing the life you want? So ponder this. Everything in the physical universe is made up of subatomic particles such as electrons. By their very nature, these particles, when they exist as pure potential, are in their wave state while they are not being observed. They are potentially everything and nothing until they are observed. They exist everywhere and nowhere until they are observed. Thus everything in our physical reality exists as pure potential. If subatomic particles can exist in an infinite number of possible places simultaneously, we are potentially capable of collapsing into existence an infinite number of possible realities. In other words, if you can imagine a future event in your life based on any one of your personal desires, that reality already exists as a possibility in the quantum field, waiting to be observed by you. If your mind can influence the appearance of an electron, then theoretically it can influence the appearance of any possibility. This means that the quantum field contains a reality in which you are healthy, wealthy, and happy, and possesses all of the qualities and capabilities of the idealized self that you hold in your thoughts. Stay with me, and you'll see that with willful attention, sincere application, and a new knowledge, and repeated daily efforts, you can use your mind as the observer to collapse quantum particles and organize a vast number of subatomic waves of probability into a desired physical event called an experience in your life. Like clay, the energy of infinite possibilities is shaped by consciousness, your mind. And if all matter is made of energy, it makes sense that consciousness, mind, in this case as Newton and Descartes called it, and energy, matter, according to the quantum model, are so intimately related that they are one. Mind and matter are completely entangled. Your consciousness, mind, has effects on energy, matter, because your consciousness is energy, and energy has consciousness. You are powerful enough to influence matter because at the most elementary level, you are energy with a consciousness. You are mindful matter. In the quantum model, the physical universe is an immaterial, interconnected, unified field of information. Potentially everything, but physically nothing. The quantum universe is just waiting for a conscious observer, you or me, to come along and influence energy in the form of potential matter by using the mind and consciousness, which are themselves energy, to make waves of energetic probabilities coalesce into physical matter. Just as the wave of possibility of the electron manifests as a particle within a specific momentary event, we observers cause a particle or groups of particles to manifest physical experiences in the form of events in our lives. This is crucial to understanding how you can cause an effect or make a change in your life. When you learn how to sharpen your skills of observation to intentionally affect your destiny, you are well on your way towards living the ideal version of your life by becoming the idealized version of yourself. Like everything else in the universe, we are, in a sense, connected to a sea of information in a dimension beyond physical space and time. We don't need to be touching or even close proximity to any physical elements in the quantum field to affect or be affected by them. The physical body is organized patterns of energy and information, which is unified with everything in the quantum field. You, like all of us, broadcast a distinct energy pattern or signature. In fact, everything material is always emitting specific patterns of energy, and this energy carries information. Your fluctuating states of mind consciously or unconsciously change that signature on a moment-to-moment basis because you are more than just a physical body. You are a consciousness using a body and a brain to express different levels of mind. Another way to look at how we humans and the quantum field are interconnected is through the concept of quantum entanglement or quantum non-local connection. Essentially, once two particles can be initially linked in some way, they will always be bonded together beyond space and time. As a result, anything that is done to one will be done to the other, even though they are spatially separated from one another. This means that since we too are made up of particles, we are all implicitly connected beyond space and time. Think about the implications of this. If you can wrap your mind around this concept, then you'd have to agree that the you that exists in a probable future is already connected to the you in this now, in a dimension beyond this time and space. Stay tuned. By the end of this book, that idea might just seem normal to you. Since we're all interconnected across distance and time, does this suggest that our thoughts and feelings can influence events in our past, as well as those we desire in our future? In July 2000, Israeli doctor Leonard Leibovici conducted a double-blind, randomized, controlled trial involving 3,393 hospital patients, divided into a control group and an intercession group. He set out to see whether prayer could have an effect on their condition. Prayer experiments are great examples of mind affecting matter at a distance. But stay with me here because everything is not always what it seems. Leibovici selected patients who had suffered sepsis, an infection while hospitalized. He randomly designated half the patients to have prayers said for them, while the other half were not prayed for. He compared the results in 3 categories: how long fever lasted, length of hospital stay, and how many died as a result of the infection. The prayed for benefited from an earlier decrease in fever and a shorter hospitalization time. The difference in the number of deaths amongst the prayed for and not prayed for groups was not statistically significant, although better in the prayed for group. That's a powerful demonstration of the benefits of prayer and how we can send an intention out into the quantum field through our thoughts and feelings. However, there's one additional element to this story that you should know about. Did it strike you as slightly odd that in July 2000, a hospital would have more than 3,000 cases of infection at once? Was it a very poorly sterilized place? Or was some kind of contagion running rampant? Actually, those who were praying weren't praying for patients who were infected in 2000. Instead, unbeknownst to them, they were praying for lists of people who had been in the hospital from 1990 to 1996, 4 to 10 years prior to the experiment. The prayed-for patients actually got better during the 1990s from the experiment conducted years later. Let me say this another way. The patients who were prayed for in 2000 all showed measurable changes in health, but those changes took effect years before. A statistical analysis of this experiment proved that these effects were far beyond coincidence. This demonstrates that our intentions, our thoughts and feelings, and our prayers not only affect our present or future, but they can actually affect our past as well. Now, this leads to the question, if you were to pray or focus on an intention for a better life for yourself, could it affect your past, present, and future? The quantum law says that all potentials exist simultaneously. Our thinking and our feeling affects all aspects of life beyond both space and time. Please note, throughout this book, I will refer interchangeably to your having and creating a state of being or a state of mind. For example, we could say that how you think and how you feel create a state of being. I want you to understand that when I use the terms state of being and state of mind, your physical body is a part of that state. In fact, as you will see later on, many people exist in a state in which the body has become the mind, when they are ruled almost exclusively by the body and how it feels. So when I talk about the observer having an effect, it's not just the brain that is at work influencing matter, but the body as well. It is your state of being, when mind and body are one as an observer, which has effects on the external world. We communicate with the quantum field primarily through our thoughts and feelings. Since our thoughts are themselves energy, as you know, the electrical impulses the brain generates can easily be measured by devices such as an EEG. Before I go into greater detail on how this works, I want to share with you a remarkable study that demonstrates how our thoughts and feelings influence matter. Cellular biologist Glenn Rain, Ph.D., conceived a series of experiments to test healers' ability to affect biological systems. Since DNA is more stable than substances such as cells or bacterial cultures, he decided to have healers hold test tubes containing DNA. This study took place at the HeartMath Research Center in California. The folks there have conducted extraordinary research into the physiology of emotions, heart-brain interactions, and much more. Essentially, they and others have documented a specific link between our emotional states and our heart rhythms. When we have negative emotions, such as anger and fear, our heart rhythms become erratic and disorganized. In contrast, positive emotions, love and joy, for instance, produce highly ordered, coherent patterns that the HeartMath researchers refer to as heart coherence. In Dr. Rain's experiment, he first studied a group of 10 individuals who were well practiced in using techniques that HeartMath teaches to build heart-focused coherence. They applied the techniques to produce strong, elevated feelings such as love and appreciation. Then for 2 minutes, they held vials containing DNA samples suspended in deionized water. When those samples were analyzed, no statistically significant changes had occurred. A second group of trained participants did the same thing, but instead of just creating positive emotions, the feeling of love and appreciation, they simultaneously held an intention, a thought, to either wind or unwind the strands of DNA. This group produced statistically significant changes in the conformation, shape of the DNA samples. In some cases, the DNA was wound or unwound as much as 25%. A third group of trained subjects held a clear intent to change the DNA, but they were instructed not to enter into a positive emotional state. In other words, they were only using thought, intention, to affect matter. The result, no changes to the DNA samples. The positive emotional state that the first group entered did nothing by itself to the DNA. Another group's clearly held intentional thought, unaccompanied by emotion, also had no impact. Only when subjects held both heightened emotions and clear objectives in alignment were they able to produce the intended effect. An intentional thought needs an energizer, a catalyst, and that energy is an elevated emotion. Heart and mind working together, feelings and thoughts unified into a state of being. If a state of being can wind and unwind strands of DNA in 2 minutes, what does this say about our ability to create reality? What the heart math experiment demonstrates is that the quantum field doesn't respond simply to our wishes, our emotional requests. It doesn't just respond to our aims, our thoughts. It only responds when those two are aligned or coherent, that is, when they are broadcasting the same signal. When we combine an elevated emotion with an open heart and a conscious intention with a clear thought, we signal the field to respond in amazing ways. The quantum field responds not to what we want, it responds to who we are being. Since every potential in the universe is a wave of probability that has an electromagnetic field and is energetic in nature, it makes sense that our thoughts and feelings are no exception. I find it a useful model to think of thoughts as the electrical charge in the quantum field, and feelings as the magnetic charge in the field. The thoughts we think send an electrical signal out into the field. The feelings we generate magnetically draw events back to us. Together, how we think and how we feel produces a state of being, which generates an electromagnetic signature that influences every atom in our world. This should prompt us to ask, what am I broadcasting, consciously or unconsciously, on a daily basis? All potential experiences exist as electromagnetic signatures in the quantum field. There are an infinite number of potential electromagnetic signatures for genius, for wealth, for freedom, for health, that already exist as a frequency pattern of energy. If you could create a new electromagnetic field by changing your state of being, which matches that potential in the quantum field of information, is it possible that your body would be drawn to that event, or that event would find you? Refer Figure 1E, Electromagnetic Potentials in the Quantum Field. Quite simply, our routine, known thoughts and feelings perpetuate the same state of being which creates the same behaviors and creates the same reality. So if we want to change some aspect of our reality, we have to think, feel, and act in new ways. We have to be different in terms of our responses to experiences. We have to become someone else. We have to create a new state of mind. we need to observe a new outcome with that new mind. From a quantum standpoint, we have to create a different state of being as an observer and generate a new electromagnetic signature. When we do, we will match a potential reality in the field that exists only as an electromagnetic potential. Once that match exists between who we are being, what we are broadcasting, and the electromagnetic potential in the field, we will be pulled towards that potential reality, or it will find us. I know that it's frustrating when life seems to produce an endless succession of minor variations on the same negative outcomes. But as long as you stay the same person, as long as your electromagnetic signature remains the same, you can't expect a new outcome. To change your life is to change your energy, to make an elemental change in your mind and emotions. If you want a new outcome, you'll have to break the habit of being yourself and reinvent a new self. What do your state of being and a laser have in common? I'll make this connection to illustrate another thing you need to know if you want to change your life. A laser is an example of a very coherent signal. When physicists talk about a coherent signal, they are referring to a signal made up of waves that are in phase. Their troughs, low points, and crests, high points, are parallel. When those waves are coherent, they are much more powerful. Refer to Figure 1F, Wave Patterns. Waves in a signal are either aligned or unaligned, coherent or incoherent. The same goes for your thoughts and feelings. How many times have you tried to create something, thinking in your mind that the end result was possible, but feeling in your heart that it wasn't? What was the result of that incoherent, out-of-phase signal that you were sending? Why is it that nothing manifested? As you just saw with the heart math study, quantum creating only works when your thoughts and feelings are aligned. Just as the waves in a signal are much more powerful when they are coherent, the same is true of when your thoughts and feelings are aligned. When you hold clear, focused thoughts about your purpose, accompanied by your passionate emotional engagement, you broadcast a stronger electromagnetic signal that pulls you towards a potential reality that matches what you want. I frequently talk to my workshop audiences about my grandmother, a woman I adored. She was old school Italian, as steeped in Catholic guilt as she was in the tradition of making tomato gravy or spoon on pasta. She prayed constantly for things and deliberately thought about a new life, but the guilt that had been instilled in her throughout her upbringing confused the signal she was sending. She only manifested more reasons to feel guilty. If your intentions and desires haven't produced consistent results, you've probably been sending an incoherent, mixed message into the field. You may want wealth, you may think wealthy thoughts, but if you feel poor, you aren't going to attract financial abundance to yourself. Why not? Because thoughts are the language of the brain, and feelings are the language of the body. You're thinking one way and feeling another way. And when the mind is in opposition to the body, or vice versa, the field won't respond in any consistent way. Instead, when mind and body are working together, when our thoughts and feelings are aligned, when we are in a new state of being, then we are sending a coherent signal on the airwaves of the invisible. Now let's fill in another piece of the puzzle. To change our reality, those outcomes that we attract to ourselves have to surprise, even astonish us in the way in which they came about. We should never be able to predict how our new creations will manifest. They must catch us off guard. They have to wake us up from the dream of the routine reality that we've grown accustomed to. These manifestations should leave us with no doubt that our consciousness made contact with the quantum field of intelligence. So we're inspired to do this again. That is the joy of the creative process. Why should you want a quantum surprise? If you can predict an event, it's nothing new. It's routine, automatic, and you have experienced it many times before. If you can predict it, the same you produce the same familiar outcome. In fact, if you're trying to control how an outcome will occur, you just went Newtonian. Newtonian, classical physics, was about trying to anticipate and predict events. It was all about cause and effect. What does going Newtonian mean when applied to your ability to create? It's when the external environment is controlling your internal environment, thinking and feeling. That's cause and effect. Instead, change your internal environment, the way you think and feel, and then see how the external environment is altered by your efforts. Strive to create an unknown, new future experience. Then when an unforeseen event occurs in your favor, you'll be pleasantly surprised. You just became a quantum creator. You just went from cause and effect to causing an effect. Hold a clear intention of what you want, but leave the how details to the unpredictable quantum field. Let it orchestrate an event in your life in a way that is just right for you. If you're going to expect anything, expect the unexpected. Surrender, trust, and let go of how a desired event will unfold. This is the biggest hurdle for most to overcome because we human beings always want to control a future reality by trying to recreate how it occurred in a past reality. I've just talked about aligning our thoughts and feelings to produce the result we want. Yet in the process, letting go of the details surrounding how that event will come about. That's a leap of faith, and it's necessary if we are to exchange a life of humdrum, predictable outcomes for a joyful life of new experiences and quantum surprises. But we'll need to make yet another leap of faith to bring what we want into reality. Under what circumstances are you typically grateful? You may answer, I'm grateful for my family, the nice home I have, my friends, and my job. What those things have in common is that they're already in your life. Generally, we are grateful for something that already happened or is already present in our lives. You and I have been conditioned into believing that we need a reason for joy, a motivation to feel gratitude, grounds to be in a state of love. That's relying on external reality to make us feel differently internally. It's Newton's model. The new model of reality challenges us, as quantum creators, to change something within us, in mind and body, in our thoughts and feelings, before we can experience the physical evidence with our senses. Can you give thanks and feel the elevated emotions associated with a desired event before it occurs? Can you imagine that reality so completely that you begin to be in that future life now? In terms of quantum creating, can you give thanks for something that exists as a potential in the quantum field, but has not yet happened in your reality? If so, you are moving from cause and effect, waiting for something outside of you to make a change inside of you, to causing an effect, changing something inside of you to produce the effect outside of you. When you are in a state of gratitude, you transmit a signal into the field that an event has already occurred. Gratitude is more than an intellectual thought process. You have to feel as though whatever you want is in your reality at this very moment. Thus, your body, which only understands feelings, must be convinced that it has the emotional quotient of the future experience happening to you now. I hope by now you agree on some basic underlying concepts of the quantum model, that all physical reality is primarily energy existing in a vast web that is interconnected across space and time. That web, the quantum field, holds all probabilities, which we can collapse into reality through our thoughts, consciousness, observation, feelings, and state of being. But is reality nothing but indifferent electromagnetic forces acting on and in response to one another, Is the animating spirit within us simply a function of biology and randomness? I've had conversations with people who hold this view. Ultimately, the discussion leads to a dialogue that goes something like this. Where does the intelligence that keeps our heart beating come from? Well, that's a part of the autonomic nervous system. Where is that system located? The brain's limbic system is part of the autonomic nervous system. And within the brain, are there specific tissues that are responsible for keeping the heart beating? Yes. What are those tissues made of? Cells. And what are those cells made of? Molecules. What are those molecules made of? Atoms. And what are those atoms made of? Subatomic particles? And what are those subatomic particles primarily composed of? Energy? When we arrive at the conclusion that our physiological vehicle is made up of the same stuff as the rest of the universe, and these folks bump up against the notion that what animates the body is a form of energy, the same 99.999% nothing that constitutes the physical universe, they either shrug and walk away or come to realize that there is something to this notion that a unifying principle pervades all of physical reality. Isn't it ironic, then, that we keep all of our attention on the 0.00001% of reality that is physical? Are we missing something? If this nothing consists of energy waves that carry information, and this force organizes our physical structures and their functioning, then it certainly makes sense to refer to the quantum field as an invisible intelligence. And since energy is at the basis of all physical reality, that intelligence I've just described to you has organized itself into matter. Think of the preceding conversation as a kind of template for how this intelligence has constructed reality. The quantum field is invisible potential energy that is able to organize itself from energy to subatomic particles, to atoms, to molecules, and on up the line to everything. From a physiological perspective, it organizes molecules into cells, into tissues, into organs, into systems, and finally into the body as a whole. Put another way, this potential energy lowers itself as a frequency of wave patterns until it appears as solid. It is this universal intelligence that gives life to that field and everything in it, including you and me. This power is the same universal mind that animates every aspect of the material universe. This intelligence keeps our hearts beating and our stomachs digesting food, and oversees an incalculable number of chemical reactions per second that take place in every cell. Moreover, the same consciousness prompts trees to grow fruit and causes distant galaxies to form and collapse. Because it exists in all places and times and exerts its power within us and all around us, this intelligence is both personal and universal. Understand that this universal intelligence possesses the same awareness that makes us individuals, consciousness or mindfulness. Even though this power is universal and objective, it does possess a consciousness, an awareness of self, and its own ability to move and act within the material universe. It is also completely mindful on all levels, not just of itself, but of you and me. Because this consciousness notices everything, it observes and pays attention to us. It is aware of our thoughts, our dreams, our behaviors, and our desires. It observes everything into physical form. How can a consciousness that has created all of life, that expends the energy and will to consistently regulate every function of our bodies to keep us alive, that has expressed such a deep and abiding interest in us, be anything but pure love? We've talked about two aspects of consciousness, the objective conscious intelligence of the field and the subjective consciousness that is the free-willed, self-aware individual. When we emulate the properties of this awareness, we are becoming creators. When we feel resonance with this loving intelligence, we become like it. This intelligence will orchestrate an event, an energetic response, to match whatever the subjective mind puts out into the quantum field. When our will matches its will, when our mind matches its mind, when our love for life matches its love for life, we are enacting this universal consciousness. We become the elevated power that transcends the past, heals the present, and opens the door to the future. Here's how this orchestration of events works in our lives. If we have experienced suffering, and within our minds and bodies we hold that suffering and express it through our thoughts and feelings, we broadcast that energetic signature into the field. The universal intelligence responds by sending into our lives another event that will reproduce the same intellectual and emotional response. Our thoughts send the signal out, I am suffering, and our emotions, I am suffering, draw into our lives an event to match that emotional frequency. That is, a good reason to suffer. In a very real sense, we are asking for proof of the existence of universal intelligence at all times, and it sends us feedback in our external environment at all times. That's how powerful we are. The question at the heart of this book is this: why don't we send out a signal that will produce a positive outcome for us? How can we change so that the signal we send out matches what we intend to produce in our lives? We will change when we fully commit to the belief that by choosing the thought signal we send out, we will produce an effect that is observable and unexpected. With this objective intelligence, we are not punished for our sins, that is, our thoughts, feelings, and actions, but by them. When we project into the field a signal based on the thoughts and feelings, such as suffering, produced by some undesirable experiences in our past, is it any wonder that the field responds in the same negative way? How many times have you uttered these words or very similar ones? I can't believe it. Why does this always happen to me? Based on your new understanding of the nature of reality, do you now see that those statements reflect your acceptance of the Newtonian Cartesian model in which you are a victim of cause and effect? Do you see that you are fully capable of causing an effect yourself? Do you see that instead of responding in the manner above, you could be asking yourself, how can I think, feel, and behave differently to produce the effect result that I want? Our mission, then, is to willfully move into the state of consciousness that allows us to connect to universal intelligence, make direct contact with the field of possibilities, and send out a clear signal that we truly expect to change and to see the results that we want in the form of feedback produced in our lives. When you do create purposefully, request a sign from the quantum consciousness that you have made contact with it. Dare to ask for synchronicities related to your specific desired outcomes. When you do, you are being bold enough to want to know that this consciousness is real and that it's aware of your efforts. Once you accept this, then you could create in a state of joy and inspiration. This principle asks us to lay down what we think we know, surrender to the unknown, then observe the effects in the form of feedback in our lives. And that is the best way we learn. When we get positive indications, when we see our external circumstances shift in a favorable direction, we know that whatever we did inside of us was right. Naturally, we'll remember what we did so we can do it again. So when feedback begins to occur in your life, you can choose to be like a scientist in a process of discovery. Why not monitor any changes to see that the universe is favorable to your efforts and prove to yourself that you are that powerful? So how can we connect with that state of consciousness? Newtonian physics postulated that there is always a linear series of interactions that are predictable and repeatable. You know, if A plus B equals C, then C plus D plus E equals F. But in the wacky world of the quantum model of reality, everything is intercommunicating within a higher dimensional field of information that is holistically entangled beyond space and time as we know it. One reason why quantum physics is so elusive is that for years we have been accustomed to thinking based on our senses. If we measure and reaffirm reality with our senses, we are stuck in the Newtonian paradigm. Instead, the quantum model demands that our understanding of reality not be based on our senses. Quantum physics is nonsense. In the process of creating future reality via the quantum model, our senses should be the last to experience what the mind has created. The very last thing we experience is the sensory feedback. Why? The quantum is a multi-dimensional reality that exists beyond your senses, in a realm where there is no body, no thing, no time. Thus, to move into that domain and create from that paradigm, you'll need to forget about your body for a little while. You'll also have to temporarily shift your awareness away from your external environment, all those things that you identify with in your life, your spouse, your kids, your possessions, and your problems are all part of your identity. Through them, you identify with the outer world. And finally, you'll have to lose track of linear time. That is, in the moment when you are intentionally observing a potential future experience, you will have to be so present that your mind no longer vacillates between memories of the past and expectations of a same-as-usual future. Isn't it ironic that to influence your reality, environment, heal your body, or change some event in your future, time, you have to completely let go of your external world, no thing. You have to release your awareness of your body, no body. You have to lose track of time, no time. In effect, you have to become pure consciousness. Do that and you will have dominion over the environment, your body, and time. I affectionately call these the big three. And since the subatomic world of the field is made purely of consciousness, you cannot enter any other way than via pure consciousness yourself. You cannot walk through the door into the quantum field as a somebody. You must enter as a nobody. Your brain has the innate ability to harness this skill. Stay tuned for more. When you understand that you are fully equipped to do all this, leave this world behind and enter a new reality beyond space and time, you'll be naturally inspired to apply it in your life. What does it mean to go beyond space and time? These are constructs that humans created to explain physical phenomena involving location and our sense of the temporal. When we talk about a glass sitting on a table, we reference it in terms of location, where it is in space, how long it has occupied that location. As humans, we're obsessed with these two conceptions: where we are, how long we've been there, how long we will remain, where we'll go next. Even though time is not something that we can actually sense, we feel it passing in much the same way that we sense our location in space. We feel the seconds, minutes, and hours passing by, just as we feel our bodies pressed against our chairs and our feet planted on the ground. In the quantum field, the infinite probabilities for materializing reality are beyond time and space because potential doesn't yet exist. If it doesn't exist, it doesn't have a location or occupy a position temporally. Anything that doesn't have material existence, that hasn't had its waves of probability collapsed into particle reality, exists beyond space and time. Since the quantum field is nothing but immaterial probability, it is outside of space and time. As soon as we observe one of those infinite probabilities and give it material reality, it acquires those two characteristics. Great! We have the power to make material a reality of our own choosing by selecting it from the quantum field. But we have to somehow access that field. We're always connected to it, but how do we get the field to respond to us? If we're constantly emitting energy, and therefore sending information to the field, and receiving information from it, how do we communicate more effectively with it? In upcoming chapters, I will talk at length about how to enter the field. For now, what you need to know is that to enter the field, which exists beyond space and time, you have to enter a similar state. Do you ever have any experiences when time and space seem to disappear? Think of some of those moments when you're driving and your thoughts are focused on some concern you have. When that happens, you forget about your body. You are no longer aware of how you feel in space. You forget about your environment. The external world disappears. And you forget about time. You have no idea how long you have been tranced out. At moments like these, you've been at the threshold of the door that allows you to enter the quantum field and gain access to working with universal intelligence. In essence, you've already made thought more real than anything else. Later on, I will provide instruction on how to move into that state of consciousness regularly, to access the field and to communicate more directly with the universal intelligence that animates all things. As this chapter has progressed, I've led you from the notion that mind and matter are fully separable to the quantum model, which states that they are inseparable. Mind is matter, and matter is mind. So all those times in the past when you tried to change, maybe your thinking was fundamentally limited. You likely believed that it was always circumstances outside of you that needed to change. If I didn't have so many other commitments, I could lose the excess weight and then I'd be happy. We've all stated some variation on that theme. If this, then that, cause and effect. What if you could change your mind, your thoughts, your feelings, and your way of being outside the bounds of time and space? What if you could change ahead of time and see the effects of those internal changes in your external world? Well, you can. What has profoundly and positively changed my life and the lives of so many others is the understanding that changing one's mind, and thereby having new experiences and gaining new insights, is simply a matter of breaking the habit of being oneself. When you overcome your senses, when you understand that you are not bound by the chains of your past, when you live a life that is greater than your body, your environment, time, all things are possible. The universal intelligence that animates the existence of all things will both surprise and delight you. It wants nothing more than to provide you with access to all you want. In short, when you change your mind, you change your life. Before we move on, I'd like to share a story that illustrates just how powerful and effective being in contact with the greater intelligence can be in making change an integral part of your life. My children, now young adults, have used a meditation similar to the process I will describe to you in part 3 of this book. As a result of practicing these techniques, they've manifested some remarkable adventures. Since their childhood, we've had an agreement that they work on creating material things or events that they want to experience. However, our rule is that I don't interfere or assist with producing the outcome. They have to create intended realities on their own, using their minds and interacting with the quantum field. My 20-something daughter studies art in college. It was springtime, and I asked what she wanted to manifest during an upcoming summer break. She had a laundry list. Instead of the typical college student home for the summer job, she wanted to work in Italy, learn and experience new things, visit at least 6 Italian cities, and spend 1 week in Florence since she had friends there. She wanted to work for the first 6 weeks of the summer, making a decent wage, then spend the rest of the break at home. I commended my daughter for her clear vision of what she wanted, and reminded her that universal intelligence would orchestrate the way her dream summer would manifest. She would take care of the what, a greater consciousness would take care of the how. Since my daughter is practiced in the art of thinking and feeling ahead of the actual experience, I merely reminded her to not only set an intention every day with regard to what that summer would look like, what people she would see, what events would transpire, what places she would visit, but also to feel what it would be like to experience these things. I asked her to create the vision in her mind until it was so clear and so real that the thought she was thinking became the experience, and her brain synapses began to wire that information as if it were reality. If she was still being the young woman in the dorm room with a dream of going to Italy, then she was still the same person living the same reality. So, while it was still March, she had to begin being that young woman who'd been in Italy for half the summer. No problem, she said. She had had experiences like this before when she'd wanted to be in a music video and when she'd wanted to experience an unlimited shopping spree. Both of these transpired in perfect elegance. I then reminded my daughter, you can't get up from your mental creation of this experience as the same person you were when you sat down. You have to get up from your seat as if you just had the most amazing summer of your life. No, I got it, she said. She understood my reminder that each day she had to change to a new state of being, and after every mental creation, she was to go about her day living in the elevated mood of gratitude generated by having that experience. My daughter called a few weeks later. Dad, the university is offering an art history summer course in Italy. I can get the cost of the program and all expenses down from $7,000 to $4,000. Can you help pay for that? Well, it's not that I'm an unsupportive parent, but this didn't strike me as what she had originally stated as her target. She was trying to control the outcome of this possible destiny instead of allowing the quantum field to orchestrate the events. I advised her to really inhabit that Italian trip and to think, feel, speak, and dream in Italian until she got lost in the experience. A few weeks later, when she called again, her excitement was palpable. She had been in the library chatting with her art history teacher, and they eventually slipped into speaking Italian. Both spoke the language fluently. At that point, her teacher said, I just remembered one of my colleagues needs someone to teach level 1 Italian to some American students who will be studying in Italy this summer. Of course, my daughter was hired. Get this, not only would she be paid to teach, all expenses covered, but she would be in 6 different cities in Italy for 6 weeks, spend the last week in Florence, and be able to be home for the second half of the summer. She manifested her dream job and every aspect of her original vision. This wasn't a case of a young woman pursuing this opportunity with the traditional dogged determination to find a program, searching the internet, hounding professors and so forth. Instead of following cause and effect, my daughter changed her state of being to the extent that she was causing an effect. She was living by the quantum law. As she electromagnetically connected to an intended destiny that existed in the quantum, her body was then drawn to the future event. The experience found her. The outcome was unpredictable. It came in a way that she in no way expected. It was synchronistic, and there was no doubt that it was the result of her internal efforts. Think about that for a moment. What opportunities are out there waiting to find you? Who are you being in this moment? And in every other moment? Is your being that way going to attract to you all that you desire? Can you change your state of being? And once you inhabit a new mind? Can you observe a new destiny? The answers are what the rest of this book is all about. Chapter 2. Overcoming your environment. By now, I trust you're beginning to accept the idea that the subjective mind has an effect on the objective world. You might even be keen to acknowledge that an observer can affect the subatomic world and influence a specific event just by collapsing a single electron from a wave of energy into a particle. At this point, you may also believe the scientific experiments in quantum mechanics I've discussed, which prove consciousness directly controls the tiny world of atoms, because those elements fundamentally are made of consciousness and energy. That's quantum physics in action, right? But perhaps you're still on the fence about the concept that your mind has real, measurable effects in your life. You may be asking yourself, how can my mind influence bigger events in order to change my life? How can I collapse electrons into a specific event called a new experience that I want to embrace in some future time? I wouldn't be surprised if you're wondering about your ability to create life-size experiences in the larger world of reality. My goal is that you understand and can see in action how there might be a scientific basis for accepting that your thoughts can create your reality. For the doubter, though, I'd like you to entertain the possibility that the way you think directly affects your life. If you can accept this paradigm as a possibility, then by pure reason you would have to agree that the following is possible. To create something different from what you've grown accustomed to in your personal world, you have to change the way you routinely think and feel each day. Otherwise, by repeatedly thinking and feeling the same way you did the day before, and the day before that, you will continue to create the same circumstances in your life, which will cause you to experience the same emotions, which will influence you to think equal to those emotions. Going out on a limb here, permit me to compare this situation to the proverbial hamster in the wheel. As you continually think about your problems, consciously or unconsciously, you will only create more of the same type of difficulties for yourself. And maybe you think about your problems so much because it was your thinking that created them in the first place. Perhaps your troubles feel so real because you constantly revisit those familiar feelings that initially created the problem. If you insist on thinking and feeling equal to the circumstances in your life, you will reaffirm that particular reality. So in the next few chapters, I want to focus on what you need to understand in order to change. Most people focus on three things in life: their environment, their bodies, and time. They don't just focus on those three elements, they think equal to them. But to break the habit of being yourself, you have to think greater than the circumstances of your life. Be greater than the feelings that you have memorized in your body, and live in a new line of time. If you want to change, you must have in your thoughts an idealized self, a model that you can emulate which is different from and better than the you that exists today in your particular environment, body, and time. Every great person in history knew how to do this, and you can attain greatness in your own life once you master the concepts and techniques to come. In this chapter, we'll focus on how you can overcome your environment and lay some groundwork for the 2 chapters that follow, in which we'll discuss how to overcome your body and time. Before we begin talking about how you can break the habit of being yourself, I want to appeal to your common sense for a few moments. How did this habit of thinking and feeling in the same way over and over begin? I can only answer that by talking about the brain, the starting point of our thoughts and feelings. Current neuroscientific theory tells us that the brain is organized to reflect everything we know in our environment. All of the information we have been exposed to throughout our lives, in the form of knowledge and experiences, is stored in the brain's synaptic connections. The relationships with people we've known, the variety of things we own and are familiar with, the places where we've visited and lived at different times in our lives, and the myriad experiences we've embraced throughout our years are all configured in the structures of the brain. Even the vast array of actions and behaviors that we've memorized and repeatedly performed throughout our lifetimes are imprinted in the intricate folds of our grey matter. Hence, all of our personal experiences with people and things at specific times and places are literally reflected within the networks of neurons, nerve cells that make up our brains. What do we collectively call these memories of people and things that we experience at different times and places in our lives? That's our external environment. For the most part, our brains are equal to our environment, a record of our personal past, a reflection of the life we've lived. During our waking hours, as we routinely interact with the diverse stimuli in our world, our external environment activates various brain circuits. As a consequence of that nearly automatic response, we begin to think and react equal to our environment. As the environment causes us to think, familiar networks of nerve cells fire that reflect previous experiences already wired in the brain. Essentially, we automatically think in familiar ways derived from past memories. If your thoughts determine your reality, and you keep thinking the same thoughts, which are a product and reflection of the environment, then you will continue to produce the same reality day after day. Thus, your internal thoughts and feelings exactly match your external life because it is your outer reality, with all of its problems, conditions, and circumstances, that is influencing how you're thinking and feeling in your inner reality. Every day, as you see the same people, your boss, for example, and your spouse and kids, do the same things, drive to work, perform your daily tasks, and do the same workout, go to the same places, your favorite coffee shop, the grocery store you frequent, and your place of employment, and look at the same objects, your car, your house, your toothbrush, even your own body, your familiar memories related to your known world remind you to reproduce the same experiences. We could say that the environment is actually controlling your mind. Since the neuroscientific definition of mind is the brain in action, you repeatedly reproduce the same level of mind by reminding yourself who you think you are in reference to the outer world. Your identity becomes defined by everything outside of you, because you identify with all of the elements that make up your external world. Thus, you are observing your reality with a mind that is equal to it. So you collapse the infinite waves of probabilities of the quantum field into events that reflect the mind you use to experience your life. You create more of the same. You may not think that your environment and your thoughts are that rigidly similar and your reality so easily reproduced. But when you consider that your brain is a complete record of your past, and your mind is the product of your consciousness, in one sense, you might always be thinking in the past. By responding with the same brain hardware that matches what you remember, you're creating a level of mind that is identical to the past, because your brain is automatically firing existing circuits to reflect everything you already know, have experienced, and thus can predict. According to the quantum law, which by the way is still working for you, your past is now becoming your future. Reason this. When you think from your past memories, you can only create past experiences. As all of the knowns in your life cause your brain to think and feel in familiar ways, thus creating knowable outcomes, you continually reaffirm your life as you know it. And since your brain is equal to your environment, then each morning your senses plug you into the same reality and initiate the same stream of consciousness. All of the sensory input that your brain processes from the external world, that is seeing, smelling, hearing, feeling, and tasting, turns your brain on to think equal to everything familiar in your reality. You open your eyes, and you know the person lying next to you is your spouse because of your past experiences together. You hear barking outside your door, and you know it's your dog wanting to go out. There's a pain in your back, and you remember it's the same pain you felt yesterday. You associate your outer, familiar world with who you think you are by remembering yourself in this dimension, this particular time and space. What do most of us do each morning after we've been plugged into our reality by these sensory reminders of who we are, where we are, and so forth? Well, we remain plugged into this past self by following a highly routine, unconscious set of automatic behaviors. For example, you probably wake up on the same side of the bed, slip into your robe the same way as always, look into the mirror to remember who you are, and shower following an automatic routine. Then you groom yourself to look like everyone expects you to look, and brush your teeth in your usual memorized fashion. You drink your coffee out of your favorite mug and eat your customary breakfast cereal. You put on the jacket you always wear and unconsciously zip it up. Next, you automatically drive to work along your accustomed, convenient route. At work, you do the familiar things that you've memorized how to do so well. You see the same people who push your same emotional buttons, which causes you to think the same thoughts about those people and your work and your life. Later, you hurry up and go home, so you can hurry up and eat, so you can hurry up and watch your favorite TV shows, so you can hurry up and go to bed, so you can hurry up and do it all over again. Has your brain changed at all that day? Why are you secretly expecting something different to show up in your life when you think the same thoughts, perform the same actions, and experience the same emotions every single day? Isn't that the definition of insanity? All of us have fallen prey to this type of limited life one time or another. By now, you understand the reason why. In the preceding example, it's safe to say that you're reproducing the same level of mind every day, and that if the quantum world shows that the environment is an extension of your mind, and that mind and matter are one, then as long as your mind remains the same, your life will stay status quo. Thus, if your environment remains the same, and you react by thinking in the same way, then according to the quantum model of reality, shouldn't you create more of the same? Think of it this way. The input remains the same, so the output has to remain the same. How then can you ever create anything new? There is another possible consequence that I should mention. If you keep firing the same neural patterns by living your life the same way each day, every time you respond to your familiar reality by recreating the same mind, that is, turning on the same nerve cells to make the brain work in the same way, you hardwire your brain to match the customary conditions in your personal reality, be they good or bad. There is a principle in neuroscience called Hebb's law. It basically states that nerve cells that fire together wire together. Hebb's credo demonstrates that if you repeatedly activate the same nerve cells, then each time they turn on, it will be easier for them to fire in unison again. Eventually, those neurons will develop a long-term relationship. So when I use the word hardwired, It means that clusters of neurons have fired so many times in the same ways that they have organized themselves into specific patterns with long-lasting connections. The more these networks of neurons fire, the more they wire into static routes of activity. In time, whatever the oft-repeated thought, behavior, or feeling is, it will become an automatic, unconscious habit. When your environment is influencing your mind to that extent, your habitat becomes your habit. So if you keep thinking the same thoughts, doing the same things, and feeling the same emotions, you'll begin to hardwire your brain into a finite pattern that is the direct reflection of your finite reality. Consequently, it will become easier and more natural for you to reproduce the same mind on a moment-to-moment basis. This innocent response cycle causes your brain and then your mind to reinforce even further the particular reality that is your external world. The more you fire the same circuits by reacting to your external life, the more you'll wire your brain to be equal to your personal world. You'll become neurochemically attached to the conditions in your life. In time, you'll begin to think in the box, because your brain will fire a finite set of circuits that then creates a very specific mental signature. This signature is called your personality. As an effect of this neural habitation, the two realities of the inner mind and the outer world seem to become almost inseparable. For instance, if you can never stop thinking about your problems, then your mind and your life will merge together as one. The objective world is now colored by the perceptions of your subjective mind, and thus reality continuously conforms. You become lost in the illusion of the dream. You could call this a rut, and we fall into them, but it goes much deeper than that. Not just your actions, but also your attitudes and your feelings become repetitive. You have formed the habit of being yourself by becoming, in a sense, enslaved to your environment. Your thinking has become equal to the conditions in your life, and thus you, as the quantum observer, are creating a mind that only reaffirms those circumstances into your specific reality. All you are doing is reacting to your external, known, unchanging world. In a very real way, you have become an effect of circumstances outside of yourself. You have allowed yourself to give up control of your destiny. Unlike Bill Murray's character in the movie Groundhog Day, you're not even fighting against the ceaseless monotony of what you're like and what your life has become. Worse, you aren't the victim of some mysterious and unseen force that has placed you in this repetitive loop. You are the creator of the loop. The good news is that since you created this loop, you can choose to end it. The quantum model of reality tells us that to change our lives, we must fundamentally change the ways we think, act, and feel. We must change our state of being, because how we think, feel, and behave is, in essence, our personality. It is our personality that creates our personal reality. So to create a new personal reality, a new life, we must create a new personality. We must become someone else. To change, then, is to think and act greater than our present circumstances, greater than our environment. Before I begin to explore the ways in which you can think greater than your environment and thus break the habit of being yourself, I want to remind you of something. It is possible to think greater than your present reality, and history books are filled with names of people who have done so. Men and women such as Martin Luther King Jr., William Wallace, Marie Curie, Mahatma Gandhi, Thomas Edison, and Joan of Arc. Every one of these individuals had a concept in his or her mind of a future reality that existed as a potential in the quantum field. This vision was alive in their inner world of possibilities beyond the senses, and in time, each of these people made those ideas a reality. As a common thread, they all had a dream, vision, or objective that was much larger than they were. They all believed in a future destiny that was so real in their minds that they began to live as if that dream were already happening. They couldn't see it, hear, taste, smell, or feel it, but they were so possessed in their dream that they acted in a way that corresponded to this potential reality ahead of time. In other words, they behaved as if what they envisioned was already a reality. For example, the imperialist dictum that had India under colonial rule in the early 1900s was demoralizing to Indians. Despite that, Gandhi believed in a reality that wasn't yet present in his people's lives. He wholeheartedly endorsed the concepts of equality, freedom, and non-violence with undying conviction. Even though Gandhi endorsed liberty for all, the reality of tyranny and British control at that time was quite different. The conventional beliefs of that era were in contrast to his hopes and aspirations. Although the experience of liberty was not a reality while he was initially engaged in changing India, he did not let outward evidence of adversity sway him to give up this ideal. For a long time, much of the feedback from the external world didn't show Gandhi that he was making a difference. But seldom did he allow the conditions in his environment to control his way of being. He believed in a future that he could not yet see or experience with his senses, but which was so alive in his mind that he could not live any other way. He embraced a new future life while physically living his present life. He understood that the way he was thinking, acting, and feeling would change the current conditions in his environment. And eventually, reality began to change as a result of his efforts. When our behaviors match our intentions, when our actions are equal to our thoughts, when our minds and our bodies are working together, when our words and our deeds are aligned, there's an immense power behind any individual. The greatest individuals in history were unwaveringly committed to a future destiny without any need for immediate feedback from the environment. It didn't matter to them if they hadn't yet received any sensory indication or physical evidence of the change they wanted. They must have reminded themselves daily of the reality they were focused upon. Their minds were ahead of their present environment because their environment no longer controlled their thinking. Truly, they were ahead of their time. Another fundamental element shared by each of these celebrated beings was that they were clear in their minds about exactly what they wanted to happen. Remember, we leave the how to a greater mind, and they must have all known this. Now, some in their day might have called them unrealistic. In fact, they were completely unrealistic, and so were their dreams. The event they were embracing in thought, action, and emotion was not realistic, because the reality had not yet occurred. The ignorant and the cynical might also have said their vision was nonsense, and such naysayers would have been right. A vision of future reality was nonsense. It existed in a reality beyond the senses. As another example, Joan of Arc was considered foolhardy, even insane. Her ideas challenged the beliefs of her time and made her a threat to the present political system. But once her vision was made manifest, she was considered profoundly virtuous. When one holds a dream independent of the environment, that's greatness. Coming up, we'll see that overcoming the environment is inextricably linked with overcoming the body and time. In Gandhi's case, he was not swayed by what was happening in his outer world, environment. He didn't worry about how he felt and what would happen to him, body, and he didn't care how long it would take to realize the dream of freedom, time. He simply knew that all these elements would sooner or later blend to his intentions. For all of the giants in history, Is it possible that their ideas were thriving in the laboratory of their minds to such an extent that to their brains it was as though the experience had already happened? Can you, too, change who you are by thought alone? Neuroscience has proven that we can change our brains, and therefore our behaviors, attitudes, and beliefs, just by thinking differently. In other words, without changing anything in our environment. Through mental rehearsal, repeatedly imaging, performing an action, the circuits in the brain can reorganize themselves to reflect our objectives. We can make our thoughts so real that the brain changes to look like the event has already become a physical reality. We can change it to be ahead of any actual experience in our external world. Here's an example. In Evolve Your Brain, I discussed how research subjects who mentally rehearsed one-handed piano exercises for 2 hours a day for 5 days, never actually touching any piano keys, demonstrated almost the same brain changes as people who physically perform the identical finger movements on a piano keyboard for the same length of time. Functional brain scans showed that all the participants activated and expanded clusters of neurons in the same specific area of the brain. In essence, the group who mentally rehearsed practicing the scales and chords grew nearly the same number of brain circuits as the group who physically engaged in the activity. The study demonstrates 2 important points. Not only can we change our brains just by thinking differently, but when we are truly focused and single-minded, the brain does not know the difference between the internal world of the mind and what we experience in the external environment. Our thoughts can become our experience. This notion is critical to your success or failure in your endeavor to replace old habits, prune old neural connections, with new ones, sprout new neural connections. So let's look more closely at how the same learning sequence took place in those people who mentally practiced but never physically played any notes. Whether we physically or mentally acquire a skill, there are 4 elements that we all use to change our brains: learning knowledge, receiving hands-on instruction, paying attention, and repetition. Learning is making synaptic connections. Instruction gets the body involved in order to have a new experience, which further enriches the brain. When we also pay attention and repeat our new skill over and over again, our brains will change. The group who physically played the scales and chords grew new brain circuits because they followed this formula. The participants who mentally rehearsed also followed this formula, except they never got their bodies physically involved. In their minds, they were easily able to conceive of themselves playing the piano. Remember, after these subjects repeatedly mentally practiced, their brains showed the same neurological changes as the participants who actually played the piano. New networks of neurons, neural networks, were forged, demonstrating that in effect they had already engaged in practicing the piano scales and chords without actually having that physical experience. We could say that their brains existed in the future, ahead of the physical event of playing the piano. Because of our enlarged human frontal lobe and our unique ability to make thought more real than anything else, the forebrain can naturally lower the volume from the external environment so that nothing else is being processed but a single-minded thought. This type of internal processing allows us to become so involved in our mental imaging that the brain will modify its wiring without having experienced the actual event. When we can change our minds independent of the environment and then steadfastly embrace an ideal with sustained concentration, the brain will be ahead of the environment. That is mental rehearsal, an important tool in breaking the habit of being ourselves. If we repeatedly think about something to the exclusion of everything else, we encounter a moment when the thought becomes the experience. When this occurs, the neural hardware is rewired to reflect the thought as the experience. This is the moment that our thinking changes our brains and thus our minds. To understand that neurological change can take place in the absence of physical interactions in the environment is crucial to our success in breaking the habit of being ourselves. Consider the larger implications of the finger exercise experiment. If we apply the same process, mental rehearsal, to anything that we want to do, we can change our brains ahead of any concrete experience. If you can influence your brain to change before you experience a desired future event, you will create the appropriate neural circuits that will enable you to behave in alignment with your intention before it becomes a reality in your life. Through your own repeated mental rehearsal of a better way to think, act, or be, you will install the neural hardware needed to physiologically prepare you for the new event. In fact, you'll do more than that. The brain's hardware, as I use the analogy in this book, refers to its physical structures, its anatomy right down to its neurons. If you keep installing, reinforcing, and refining your neurological hardware, the end result of that repetition is a neural network. In effect, a new software program. Just like computer software, this program, for example a behavior, an attitude, or an emotional state, now runs automatically. Now you've cultivated the brain to be ready for your new experience, and frankly, you have the mind in place so that you can handle the challenge. When you change your mind, your brain changes, and when you change your brain, your mind changes. So when the time comes to demonstrate a vision contrary to the environmental conditions at hand, it is quite possible for you to be already prepared to think and act with a conviction that is steadfast and unwavering. In fact, the more you formulate an image of your behavior in a future event, the easier it will be for you to execute a new way of being. So can you believe in a future you cannot yet see or experience with your senses, but have thought about enough times in your mind that your brain is actually changed to look like the experience has happened ahead of the physical event in your external environment? If so, then your brain is no longer a record of the past, but has become a map to the future. Now that you know you can change your brain by thinking differently, is it possible to change your body to look like it too has had an experience ahead of the actual intended circumstances? Is your mind that powerful? Stay tuned. Chapter 3. Overcoming your body. You do not think in a vacuum. Every time you have a thought, there is a biochemical reaction in the brain. You make a chemical. And as you'll learn, the brain then releases specific chemical signals to the body where they act as messengers of the thought. When the body gets these chemical messages from the brain, it complies instantly by initiating a matching set of reactions, directly in alignment with what the brain is thinking. Then the body immediately sends a confirming message back up to the brain that it's now feeling exactly the way the brain is thinking. To understand this process, how you typically think equal to your body, and how you form a new mind, you first need to appreciate the role that your brain and its chemistry plays in your life. In the last few decades, we've discovered that the brain and the rest of the body interact via powerful electrochemical signals. There is an extensive chemical factory between our ears that orchestrates a myriad of bodily functions. But relax. This is going to be Brain Chemistry 101, and a few terms are all that you need to know. All cells have receptor sites on their exterior surface that receive information from outside their boundaries. When there is a match in chemistry, frequency, and electrical charge between a receptor site and an incoming signal from the outside, the cell gets turned on to perform certain tasks. Refer Figure 3A. Cell activities. Neurotransmitters, neuropeptides, and hormones are the cause and effect chemicals for brain activity and bodily functioning. These three different types of chemicals, called ligands, the word ligare means to bind in Latin, connect to, interact with, or influence the cell in a matter of milliseconds. Neurotransmitters are chemical messengers that primarily send signals between nerve cells, allowing the brain and nervous system to communicate. There are different types of neurotransmitters, and each is responsible for a particular activity. Some excite the brain, others slow it down, while still others make us sleepy or awake. They can tell a neuron to unhook from its current connection or make it stick better to its present connection. They can even change the message as it's being sent to a neuron, rewriting it so that a different message is delivered to all of the connected nerve cells. Neuropeptides, the second type of ligand, make up the majority of these messengers. Most are manufactured in a structure of the brain called the hypothalamus. Recent studies show that our immune system also makes them. These chemicals are passed through the pituitary gland, which then releases a chemical message to the body with specific instructions. As neuropeptides make their way through the bloodstream, they attach to the cells of various tissues, primarily glands, and then turn on the third type of ligand, hormones, which further influence us to feel certain ways. Neuropeptides and hormones are the chemicals responsible for our feelings. For our purposes, think of neurotransmitters as chemical messengers, primarily from the brain and mind. Neuropeptides as chemical signalers that serve as a bridge between the brain and the body to make us feel the way we think, and hormones as the chemicals related to feelings, primarily in the body. Refer Figure 3b. Overview of the role of ligands in the brain and body. For example, when you have a sexual fantasy, all three of these factors are called to action. First, as you start to think a few thoughts, your brain whips up some neurotransmitters that turn on a network of neurons, which creates pictures in your mind. These chemicals then stimulate the release of specific neuropeptides into your bloodstream. Once they reach your sexual glands, those peptides bind to the cells of those tissues. They turn on your hormonal system and, presto, things start happening. You've made your fantasy thoughts so real in your mind that your body starts to get prepared for an actual sexual experience ahead of the event. That's how powerfully mind and body are related. But the same means, if you start to think about confronting your teenager over the new dent in the car, your neurotransmitters would start the thought process in your brain to produce a specific level of mind. Your neuropeptides would chemically signal your body in a specific way, and you would begin to feel a bit riled up. As the peptides find their way to your adrenal glands, they would then be prompted to release the hormones adrenaline and cortisol. And now, you are definitely feeling fired up. Chemically, your body is ready for battle. As you think different thoughts, your brain circuits fire in corresponding sequences, patterns, and combinations, which then produce levels of mind equal to those thoughts. Once these specific networks of neurons are activated, the brain produces specific chemicals with the exact signature to match those thoughts, so that you can feel the way you were just thinking. Then, when you have great thoughts, or loving thoughts, or joyous thoughts, you produce chemicals that make you feel great, or loving, or joyful. The same holds true if you have negative, fearful, or impatient thoughts. In a matter of seconds, you begin to feel negative, or anxious, or impatient. There's a certain synchronicity that takes place moment by moment between the brain and the body. In fact, as we begin to feel the way we are thinking, because the brain is in constant communication with the body, we begin to think the way we are feeling. The brain constantly monitors the way the body is feeling. Based on the chemical feedback it receives, it will generate more thoughts that produce chemicals corresponding to the way that the body is feeling, so that we first begin to feel the way we think, and then to think the way we feel. Refer Figure 3C, Cycle of Thinking and Feeling. We will delve deeper into this idea throughout the book, but consider that thoughts are primarily related to the mind and the brain, and feelings are connected to the body. Therefore, as the feelings of the body align to thoughts from a particular state of mind, mind and body are now working together as one. And as you'll recall, when the mind and body are in unison, the end product is called a state of being. We could also say that the process of continuously thinking and feeling and thinking creates a state of being which produces effects on our reality. A state of being means that we have become familiar with a mental, emotional state, a way of thinking and a way of feeling, which has become an integral part of our self-identity. And so we describe who we are by how we are thinking and thus feeling, or being in the present moment. I am angry. I am suffering. I am inspired. I am insecure. I am negative. But years of thinking certain thoughts, and then feeling the same way, and then thinking equal to those feelings, the hamster in the wheel, creates a memorized state of being in which we can empathetically declare our I am statement as an absolute. That means we're now at the point when we define ourselves as this state of being. Our thoughts and feelings have merged. For example, we say, I have always been lazy. I am an anxious person. I'm typically uncertain of myself. I have worthiness issues. I'm short-tempered and impatient. I'm really not that smart, and so on. And those particular memorized feelings contribute to our personality traits. Warning: when feelings become the means of thinking, or if we cannot think greater than how we feel, we can never change. To change is to think greater than how we feel. To change is to act greater than the familiar feelings of the memorized self. As a practical example, let's say you're driving to work this morning and you begin to think about the heated encounter you had a few days ago with a coworker. As you think the thoughts associated with that person and that particular experience, your brain starts releasing chemicals that circulate throughout your body. Very quickly, you begin to feel exactly the way you were thinking. You probably become angry. Your body sends a message back to your brain saying, "Yep, I'm feeling really ticked off." Of course, your brain, which constantly communicates with the body and monitors its internal chemical order, is influenced by the sudden change in the way you're feeling. As a result, you begin to think differently. The moment you begin to feel the way you think, then you begin to think the way you feel. You unconsciously reinforce the same feeling by continuing to think angry and frustrated thoughts, which then makes you feel more angry and frustrated. In effect, your feelings are now controlling your thinking. Your body is now driving your mind. As the cycle goes on, your angry thoughts produce more chemical signals to the body, which activate the adrenal chemicals associated with your angry feelings. Now you become enraged and aggressive. You feel flushed. Your stomach is twisted into a knot. Your head pounds and your muscles start to clench. As all those heightened feelings flood the body and change its physiology, this chemical cocktail fires up a set of circuits in the brain, causing you to think equal to those emotions. Now you're telling your associate off 10 different ways in the privacy of your own mind. You indignantly conjure up a litany of past events that validate your present upset, brainstorming through a letter recounting all those complaints you've always wanted to lodge. In your mind, you've already forwarded it to your boss before you can even arrive at work. You exit the car dazed and crazed and a breath away from homicidal. Hello, a walking, talking model of an angry person. And all of this started with a single thought. In this moment, it seems impossible to think greater than you feel. And that's why it's so hard to change. The result of this cyclic communication between your brain and body is that you tend to react predictably to these kinds of situations. You create patterns of the same familiar thoughts and feelings. You unconsciously behave in automatic ways, and you are mired in these routines. This is how the chemical you functions. Why is it so hard to change? Imagine that your mother loved to suffer, and through long observation you unconsciously saw that this behavior pattern enabled her to get what she wanted in life. Let's also say that you've had a few tough experiences in your own life, which created quite a bit of suffering for you. Those memories still elicit an emotional reaction, centered around a specific person at a particular place at a certain time in your life. You've thought about the past often enough, and somehow those memories are easy to recall, even automatic. Now imagine that for more than 20 years you have practiced thinking and feeling and thinking about suffering. Actually, you no longer need to think about the past event to create the feeling. You can't seem to think or act any other way than how you always feel. You've memorized suffering by your recurrent thoughts and feelings, those related to that incident as well as other events in your life. Your thoughts about yourself and your life tend to be colored by feelings of victimization and self-pity. Repeating the same thoughts and feelings you've courted for more than 20 years has conditioned your body to remember the feeling of suffering without much conscious thought. This seems so natural and normal now. It's who you are. And any time you try to change anything about yourself, it's like the road turns back on you. You're right back to your old self. What most people don't know is that when they think about a highly charged emotional experience, they make the brain fire in the exact sequences and patterns as before. They are firing and wiring their brains to the past by reinforcing those circuits into ever more hardwired networks. They also duplicate the same chemicals in the brain and body, in varying degrees, as if they were experiencing the event again in that moment. Those chemicals begin to train the body to further memorize that emotion. Both the chemical results of thinking and feeling and thinking, as well as the neurons firing and wiring together, condition the mind and the body into a finite set of automatic programs. We are capable of reliving a past event over and over, perhaps thousands of times in one lifetime. It's this unconscious repetition that trains the body to remember that emotional state, equal to or better than the conscious mind does. When the body remembers better than the conscious mind, that is when the body is the mind. That is called a habit. Psychologists tell us that by the time we're in our mid-30s, our identity or personality will be completely formed. This means that, for those of us over 35, we have memorized a select set of behaviors, attitudes, beliefs, emotional reactions, habits, skills, associative memories, conditioned responses, and perceptions that are now subconsciously programmed within us. Those programs are running us because the body has become the mind. This means that we will think the same thoughts, feel the same feelings, react in identical ways, behave in the same manner, believe the same dogmas, and perceive reality the same ways. About 95% of who we are by midlife is a series of subconscious programs that have become automatic. Driving a car, brushing our teeth, overeating when we're stressed, worrying about our future, judging our friends, complaining about our lives, blaming our parents, not believing in ourselves, and insisting on being chronically unhappy, just to name a few. Since the body becomes the subconscious mind, it's easy to see that in situations when the body becomes the mind, the conscious mind no longer has much to do with our behavior. The instant we have a thought, feeling, or reaction, the body runs on automatic pilot. We go unconscious. Take, for example, a mother driving a minivan to drop her kids off at school. How is she able to navigate traffic, break up arguments, drink her coffee, shift gears, and help her son blow his nose, and all at once? Much like a computer program, these actions have become automatic functions that can run very fluidly and easily. Mum's body is skillfully doing everything because it has memorized how to do all these deeds through much repetition. She no longer has any conscious thought about how she does them. They are habitual. Think about that. 5% of the mind is conscious, struggling against 95% that is running subconscious automatic programs. We've memorized a set of behaviors so well that we have become an automatic, habitual body-mind. In fact, when the body has memorized a thought, action, or feeling, to the extent that the body is the mind, when the mind and body are one, we are in a state of being the memory of ourselves. And if 95% of who we are by age 35 is a set of involuntary programs, memorized behaviors, and habitual emotional reactions, it follows that 95% of our day we are unconscious. We only appear to be awake. Yikes! So a person may consciously want to be happy, healthy, and free, but the experience of hosting 20 years of suffering and the repeated cycling of those chemicals of pain and pity have subconsciously conditioned the body to be in a habitual state. We live by habit when we are no longer aware of what we're thinking, doing, or feeling. We become unconscious. The greatest habit we must break is the habit of being ourselves. Example, when the body is running the show. Here are some practical illustrations of the body being in a habitual state. Have you ever been unable to consciously remember a phone number? Try as you may, you can't even recall 3 digits out of the string of numbers required to make the call. And yet, you can pick up the phone and watch as your fingers dial the number. Your conscious thinking brain can't remember the numbers, but you've practiced this action so many times with your fingers that your body now knows and remembers better than your brain. That example was for those of us who grew up before speed dial or cell phones came along. Perhaps you've had the same experience with typing your PIN into an ATM or entering a password online. Similarly, I can recall times when I worked out at a gym and had a locker with a combination lock. I was so tired after the workout that I couldn't remember the combination. I'd stare at the dial trying to recall the sequence of 3 numbers, and they wouldn't surface. However, when I started to twirl the dial, the combination would come back to me, almost as if by magic. Again, this happens because we practice something so many times that our bodies knew better than our conscious minds. The body subconsciously has become the mind. Remember that 95% of who we are by age 35 sits in the same subconscious memory system, in which the body automatically runs a programmed set of behaviors and emotional reactions. In other words, the body is running the show. In truth,
The body is the servant of the mind. It follows that if the body has become the mind, the servant has become the master, and the former master, the conscious mind, has gone to sleep. The mind might think it's still in charge, but the body is influencing decisions equal to its memorized emotions. Now let's say that the mind wants to get back in control. What do you think the body's going to say? Where have you been? Go back to sleep. I've got it together here. You don't have the will, the persistence, or the awareness to do what I've been doing all this time while you were unconsciously following my orders. I even modified my receptor sites over the years in order to serve you better. You thought you were running things while I've been influencing you all along and urging you to make all your decisions equal to what feels right and familiar. And when the 5% that is conscious is going against 95% that is running subconscious automatic programs, the 95% is so reflexive that it only takes one stray thought or a single stimulus from the environment to turn on the automatic program again. Then we're back to the same old, thinking the same thoughts, performing the same actions, but expecting something different to happen in our lives. When we try to regain control, this is when the body signals the brain to begin talking us out of our conscious goals. Our internal chatter comes up with a battery of reasons why we should not attempt to do anything out of the ordinary, not break out of the habituated state of being that we're used to. It will pick up all of our weaknesses, which it knows and fosters, and hurl them at us one by one. We create worst-case scenarios in our minds so that we don't have to rise above those familiar feelings. Because when we try to break the internal chemical order we have made so second nature, the body goes into chaos. Its internal badgering feels nearly irresistible, and plenty of times we succumb. The subconscious mind only knows what you have programmed it to do. Have you ever been typing along on your laptop and all of a sudden your computer starts running automatic programs that you have no control over? When you try to use the conscious mind to stop the automatic subconscious programs stored in your body, it's like yelling at a computer that's gone rogue, with several programs running while windows are popping up and showing more than you can handle. Hey, stop that! The computer isn't even going to register that. It's going to keep doing what it does until there is some sort of intervention, till you get into its operating system and change some settings. In this book, you will learn how to get into the subconscious and reprogram it with a new set of strategies. In effect, you have to unlearn or unwire your old thinking and feeling patterns and then relearn or rewire your brain with new patterns of thinking and feeling, based on who you want to be instead. When you condition the body with a new mind, the two can no longer work in opposition, but must be in harmony. This is the point of change, self-creation. Let's use a real-life situation to illustrate what happens when we decide to break from some memorized emotional state and change our minds. I think we can all relate to one common state of being: guilt. So I'm going to use that to illustrate in practical terms how this cycle of thinking and feeling works against us. Then we'll identify some of the efforts the brain-body system is going to make to remain in control and preserve that negative state of being. Imagine that you frequently feel guilty about one thing or another. Something goes wrong in a relationship, a simple miscommunication, someone unreasonably misplacing his or her anger on you or whatever. You wind up taking the blame and feeling bad. Picture yourself as one of those people who repeatedly say or think, "It was my fault." After 20 years of doing this to yourself, you feel guilty and think guilty thoughts automatically. You have created an environment of guilt for yourself. Other factors have contributed to this, but for now, let's stay with this notion on how your thinking and feeling have created your state of being and your environment. Every time you think a guilty thought, you've signaled your body to produce the specific chemicals that make up the feeling of guilt. You've done this so often that your cells are swimming in a sea of guilt chemicals. The receptor sites on your cells adapt so that they can better take in and process this particular chemical expression, that of guilt. The enormous amount of guilt bathing the cells begins to feel normal to them, and eventually what the body perceives as normal starts to be interpreted as pleasurable. It's like living for years near an airport. You get so used to the noise that you no longer hear it consciously, unless one jet flies lower than usual and the roar of its engines is so much louder that it gets your attention. The same thing happens to your cells. As a result, they literally become desensitized to the chemical feelings of guilt. They will require a stronger, more powerful emotion from you, a higher threshold of stimuli to turn on the next time. And when that stronger hit of guilt chemicals gets the body's attention, your cells perk up at that stimulation, much like that first cup of Java feels to a coffee drinker. And when each cell divides at the end of its life and makes a daughter cell, the receptor sites on the outside of the new cell will require a higher threshold of guilt to turn them on. Now the body demands a stronger emotional rush of feeling bad in order to feel alive. You become addicted to guilt by your own doing. When anything goes wrong or is awry in your life, you automatically assume that you're the guilty party. But that seems normal to you now. You don't even have to think about feeling guilty. You just are that way. Not only is your mind not conscious of how you express your guilty state by way of the things you say and do, but your body wants to feel its accustomed level of guilt, because that's what you have trained it to do. You have become unconsciously guilty most of the time. Your body has become the mind of guilt. Only when, say, a friend points out that you needn't have apologized to the store clerk for giving you the wrong change, do you realize how pervasive this aspect of your personality has become. Let's say that this triggers one of those moments of enlightenment, an epiphany, and you think, she's right. Why do I apologize all the time? Why do I take responsibility for everyone else's missteps? After you reflect on your history of constantly pleading guilty, you say to yourself, today I'm going to stop blaming myself and making excuses for other people's bad behavior. I'm going to change. Because of your decision, you're no longer going to think the same thoughts that produce the same feelings and vice versa. And if you falter, you've made a deal with yourself that you're going to stop and remember your intention. 2 hours go by and you feel really good about yourself. You think, wow, this is actually working. Unfortunately, your body's cells aren't feeling so good. Over the years, you've trained them to demand more molecules of emotion, guilt in this case, in order to fulfill their chemical needs. You had trained your body to live as a memorized chemical continuity. But now you're interrupting that, denying its chemical needs and going contrary to its subconscious programs. The body becomes addicted to guilt or any emotion in the same way that it would get addicted to drugs. At first, you only need a little of the emotion, drug, in order to feel it. Then your body becomes desensitized, and your cells require more and more of it just to feel the same again. Trying to change your emotional pattern is like going through drug withdrawal. Once your cells are no longer getting the usual signals from the brain about feeling guilty, they begin to express concern. Before, the body and the mind were working together to produce this state of being called guilt. Now, you are no longer thinking and feeling and thinking in the same way. Your intention is to produce more positive thoughts, but the body is still all revved up to produce feelings of guilt based on guilty thoughts. Think of this as a kind of highly specialized assembly line. Your brain has programmed the body to expect one part that will fit into this larger assembly. All of a sudden, you've centered another part that doesn't fit into the space where the old guilty part once did. An alarm goes off and the whole operation comes to a standstill. Your cells are always spying on what is happening in the brain and the mind. Your body is the best mind reader ever. So they all stop what they're doing, look up towards the brain and think, "What are you doing up there? You insisted on being guilty, and we loyally followed your commands for years. We subconsciously memorized a program of guilt from your repetitive thoughts and feelings. We changed our receptor size to reflect your mind, modified our chemistry so that you could automatically feel guilty. We have maintained your internal chemical order, independent of any external circumstances in your life. We are so used to the same chemical order that your new state of being feels uncomfortable, unfamiliar. We want the familiar, the predictable, and what feels natural. All of a sudden you're going to change? We can't have that." So the cells huddle up and say, "Let's send a protest message to the brain. But we have to be sneaky, because we don't want her to think she's actually responsible for these thoughts. We don't want her to know they came from us." So now the cells send a message marked urgent right up the spinal cord to the surface of the thinking brain. I call that the fast track, because the message goes straight up the central nervous system in a matter of seconds. At the same time this is happening, the chemistry of the body, the chemistry of guilt, is now at a lower level, because you're not thinking and feeling the same way. But this drop does not go unnoticed. A thermostat in the brain called the hypothalamus also sends out an alarm that says, "Chemical values are going down, we've got to make more." So the hypothalamus signals the thinking brain to revert back to its old habitual ways. This is the slow track because it takes longer for the chemicals to circulate through the bloodstream. The body wants you to return to your memorized chemical self, so it influences you to think in familiar, routine ways. These fast-track and slow-track cellular responses occur simultaneously, and the next thing you know, you start to hear the chatter of thoughts like these in your head. "Oh, you're too tired today. You can start tomorrow. Tomorrow's a better day. Really, you can do it later." And my favorite, "No, this doesn't feel right." If that doesn't work, a second sneak attack occurs. The body-mind wants to be in control again, so it starts picking on you a bit. "It's okay for you to feel a little bit bad right now. It's your father's fault. Don't you feel bad about what he did to you in the past? In fact, let's take a look at your past so we can remember why you are this way. Look at you. You're a mess, a loser. You're pathetic and weak. Your life's a failure. You'll never change. You're too much like your mother. Why don't you just quit?" As you continue this awfulizing, the body is tempting the mind to return to the state it has unconsciously memorized. On a rational level, that's absurd, but obviously on some level it feels good to feel bad. The moment we listen to those sub-vocalizations, believe those thoughts, and respond by feeling the same familiar feelings, mental amnesia sets in, and we forget our original aim. The funny thing is that we actually begin to believe what the body is telling the brain to say to us. We immerse ourselves back into that automatic program and return to being our old self. Most of us can relate to this little scenario. It's no different from any habit we've tried to break. Whether we're addicted to cigarettes, chocolate, alcohol, shopping, gambling, or biting our nails, the moment we cease the habitual action, chaos rages between the body and the mind. The thoughts we embrace are intimately identified with the feelings of what it would be like to experience the indulgence. When we give in to the cravings, we will keep producing the same outcomes in our lives because the mind and body are in opposition. Our thoughts and feelings are working against each other, and if the body has become the mind, we will always fall prey to how we feel. As long as we use familiar feelings as a barometer, as feedback on our efforts to change, we'll always talk ourselves out of greatness. We will never be able to think greater than our internal environment. We will never be able to see a world of possible outcomes other than the negative ones from our past. Our thoughts and feelings have that much power over us. The next step in breaking the habit of being ourselves is understanding how important it is to get the mind and body working together and to break the chemical continuity of our guilty, ashamed, angry, depressed state of being. Resisting the body's demand to restore that old, unhealthy order isn't easy, but help is only a thought away. You will learn in the following pages that for true change to occur, it is essential to unmemorize an emotion that has become part of your personality, and then to recondition the body to a new mind. It's easy to feel hopeless when we realize that the chemistry of our emotions has habituated our bodies to a state of being that is too often a product of anger, jealousy, resentment, sadness, and so forth. After all, I've said that these programs, these propensities, are buried in our subconscious. The good news is that we can become consciously aware of these tendencies. I'll deal more with this concept in the pages ahead. For now, I hope you can accept that to change your personality, you need to change your state of being, which is intimately connected to feelings that you've memorized. Just as negative emotions can become embedded in the operating system of your subconscious, so can positive ones. At one time or another, we've all consciously declared, "I want to be happy." But until the body is instructed otherwise, it's going to continue expressing those programs of guilt or sadness or anxiety. The conscious intellectual mind may reason that it wants joy, but the body has been programmed to feel otherwise for years. We stand on a soapbox proclaiming change to be in our best interests, but on a visceral level, we can't seem to bring up the feeling of true happiness. That's because mind and body aren't working together. The conscious mind wants one thing, but the body wants another. If you've been devoted to feeling negatively for years, those feelings have created an automatic state of being. We could say that you are subconsciously unhappy, right? Your body has been conditioned to be negative. It knows how to be unhappy better than your conscious mind knows otherwise. You don't even have to think about how to be negative. You just know that it's how you are. How can your conscious mind control this attitude in the subconscious body-mind? Some maintain that positive thinking is the answer. I want to be clear that by itself, positive thinking never works. Many so-called positive thinkers have felt negative most of their lives, and now they're trying to think positively. They are in a polarized state in which they are trying to think one way in order to override how they feel inside of them. They consciously think one way, but they are being the opposite. When the mind and body are in opposition, change will never happen. By definition, emotions are the end products of past experiences in life. When you're in the midst of an experience, the brain receives vital information from the external environment through 5 different sensory pathways: sight, smell, sound, taste, and touch. As that cumulative sensory data reaches the brain and is processed, networks of neurons arrange themselves into specific patterns reflecting the external event. The moment those nerve cells string into place, the brain releases chemicals. Those chemicals are called an emotion or a feeling. In this book, I use the words feeling and emotion interchangeably because they are close enough for our understanding. When those emotions begin to chemically flood your body, you detect a change in your internal order. You're thinking and feeling differently than you were moments before. Naturally, when you notice this change in your internal state, you'll pay attention to whatever it was in your external environment that caused the change. When you can identify whatever it was in your outer world that caused your internal change, that event in and of itself is called a memory. Neurologically and chemically, you encode that environmental information into your brain and your body. Thus, you can remember experiences better because you recall how they felt at the time they happened. Feelings and emotions are a chemical record of past experiences. For example, your boss arrives for your performance review. You noticed immediately that he looks red-faced, even irritated. As he starts speaking in a loud voice, you smell garlic on his breath. He accuses you of undermining him in front of other employees and says he has passed you over for a promotion. In this moment, you feel jittery, weak in the knees, and queasy, and your heart is racing. You feel fearful, betrayed, and angry. All of the cumulative sensory information, everything you're smelling, seeing, feeling, and hearing, is changing your internal state. You associate that external experience with a change in how you're feeling internally, and it brands you emotionally. You go home and repeatedly review this experience in your mind. Every time you do, you remind yourself of the accusing, intimidating look on your employer's face, how he yelled at you, what he said, and even how he smelled. Then you once again feel fearful and angry. You produce the same chemistry in your brain and body as if the performance review is still happening. Because your body believes it is experiencing the same event again and again, you are conditioning it to live in the past. Let's reason this a bit further. Think of your body as the unconscious mind, or as an objective servant that takes orders from your consciousness. It is so objective that it doesn't know the difference between the emotions that are created from experiences in your external world and those you fabricate in your internal world by thought alone. To the body, they are the same. What if this cycle of thinking and feeling that you were betrayed continues for years on end? If you keep dwelling on that experience with your boss or reliving those familiar feelings day in and day out, you continually signal your body with chemical feelings that it associates with the past. This chemical continuity fools the body into believing that it is still re-experiencing the past. So the body keeps reliving the same emotional experience. When your memorized thoughts and feelings consistently force your body to be in the past, we could say that the body becomes the memory of the past. If those memorized feelings of betrayal have been driving your thoughts for years, then your body has been living in the past 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year. In time, your body is anchored in the past. You know that when you repeatedly recreate the same emotions until you cannot think any greater than how you feel, your feelings are now the means of your thinking. And since your feelings are a record of previous experiences, you're thinking in the past. And by quantum law, you create more of the past. Bottom line, most of us live in the past and resist living in a new future. Why? The body is so habituated to memorizing the chemical records of our past experiences that it grows attached to these emotions. In a very real sense, we become addicted to those familiar feelings. So when we want to look to the future and dream of new vistas and bold landscapes in our not-too-distant reality, the body, whose currency is feelings, resists the sudden change in direction. Accomplishing this about-face is a great labor of personal change. So many people struggle to create a new destiny, but find themselves unable to overcome the past memory of who they feel they are. Even if we crave unknown adventures and dream of new possibilities ahead in the future, we seem to be compelled to revisit the past. Feelings and emotions are not bad. They are the end products of experience. But if we always relive the same ones, we can't embrace any new experiences. Have you known people who always seem to talk about the good old days? What they're really saying is, nothing new is happening in my life to stimulate my feelings. Therefore, I'll have to reaffirm myself from some glorious moments in the past. If we believe that our thoughts have something to do with our destiny, then as creators, most of us are only going in circles. So far in discussing how the quantum model of reality relates to change, I've spent most of the time talking about our emotions, the brain, and the body. We've seen that overcoming the recurring thoughts and feelings that the body memorizes is a must if we are to break the habit of being ourselves. Another major aspect of breaking this habit has to do with our physical health. Certainly, in the hierarchy of things that most of us want to change about our lives, health issues rank way up there. And when it comes to what we'd like to change about our health, there is one set of dogmas that we're going to have to examine and dispel. The myth that genes create disease and the fallacy of genetic determinism. We will also look at a scientific understanding that may be new to you, called epigenetics, the control of genes from outside the cell, or more precisely, the study of changes in gene function that occur without a change in DNA sequence. Just as we can create new experiences for ourselves, like my daughter did, we can also gain control of a very important part of our lives, what we commonly think of as our genetic destiny. As we go along, you will see that knowing something about your genes and what signals them to be expressed or not is crucial to understanding why you have to change from the inside out. Scientific dictum used to declare that our genes were responsible for most diseases. Then a couple of decades ago, the scientific community casually mentioned that they had been in error and announced that the environment, by activating or deactivating particular genes, is the most causative factor in producing disease. We now know that less than 5% of all diseases today stem from single gene disorders, such as Tay-Sachs and Huntington's chorea, whereas around 95% of all illnesses are related to lifestyle choices, chronic stress, and toxic factors in the environment. Yet factors in our outer environment are only part of the picture. What explains why two people can be exposed to the same toxic environmental conditions, and one gets sick or diseased, while the other doesn't? How is it that when someone has multiple personality disorder, one personality can demonstrate a severe allergy to something, while another personality in that same body can be immune to the same antigen or stimulus? Why, when most healthcare providers are exposed to pathogens on a daily basis, aren't doctors and others in the medical community continually ill? There are also numerous case studies documenting identical twins who share the same genes, who have had very different experiences when it came to their health and longevity. For example, if both shared a family history of a particular disease, that illness often manifested in one twin, but not the other. Same genes, different outcomes. In all of these cases, could the person who remains healthy have such a coherent, balanced, vital internal order that even when his or her body is exposed to the same hazardous environmental conditions, the external world does nothing to his or her gene expression, and so doesn't signal the genes to create disease? It's true that the external environment influences our internal environment. However, by changing our internal state of being, we can overcome the effects of a stressful or toxic environment so that certain genes do not become activated. We may not be able to control all the conditions in our external environment, but certainly we have a choice in controlling our inner environment. To explain how we can control our inner environment, I need to talk a bit about the nature of genes, which are expressed in the body when cells manufacture specific proteins, the building blocks of life. The body is a protein-producing factory. Muscle cells make muscle proteins that are called actin and myosin. Skin cells make skin proteins called collagen and elastin. And stomach cells make stomach proteins called enzymes. Most of the cells of the body make proteins, and genes are the way we make them. We express particular genes via certain cells making particular proteins. The way most organisms adapt to conditions in their environment is through gradual genetic modifications. For example, when an organism is faced with tough environmental conditions, such as temperature extremes, dangerous predators, fast prey, destructive winds, strong currents, and so on, it is forced to overcome the adverse aspects of its world in order to survive. As organisms record those experiences in the wiring in their brains and the emotions in their bodies, they will change over time. If lions are chasing prey that can outrun them, then by actively engaging the same experience for generations, they will develop longer legs, sharper teeth, or bigger hearts. All of these changes are the result of genes making proteins that modify the body to adapt to its environment. Let's stay with the animal world to look at how this works in terms of adaptation or evolution. A hypothetical group of mammals migrated to an environment in which the temperature ranged from -15 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit. The genes in those mammals, over many generations of living under extremely cold conditions, would eventually be triggered to produce a new protein, which would produce thicker and greater amounts of fur. Hair and fur are proteins. Numerous insect species have evolved the ability to camouflage themselves. Some that live in trees or other foliage have adapted to look like twigs or thorns, enabling them to escape the notice of birds. The chameleon is probably the best known of the camouflages, and it owes its color-changing abilities to the genetic expression of proteins. In these processes, genes encode the conditions of the external world. That's evolution, right? Our genes are as changeable as our brains. The latest research in genetics shows that different genes are activated at different times. They are always in flux and being influenced. There are experience-dependent genes that are activated where there is growth, healing, or learning, and there are behavioral state-dependent genes that are influenced during stress, emotional arousal, or dreaming. One of the most active areas of research today is epigenetics, literally above genetics, the study of how the environment controls gene activity. Epigenetics flies in the face of the conventional genetic model, which stated that DNA controls all of life and that all gene expression takes place inside the cell. This old understanding doomed us to a predictable future in which our destiny fell prey to our genetic inheritance, and all cellular life was predetermined, like an automatic ghost in the machine. In fact, epigenetic changes in DNA expression can be passed on to future generations. But how do they get passed on if the DNA code stays the same? While a scientific explanation is beyond the scope of this book, we can use an analogy. Let's compare a genetic sequence to a blueprint. Imagine that you start with a blueprint for a house and scan it into your computer. Then using Photoshop, you could alter its appearance on the screen, changing a number of characteristics without changing the blueprint. For example, you could change the expression of variables such as color, size, scale, dimensions, materials, and so on. Thousands of people representing environmental variables could produce different images, but they would all be expressions of the same blueprint. Epigenetics empowers us to think about change more profoundly. The epigenetic paradigm shift gives us free will to activate our own gene activity and modify our genetic destiny. For the sake of example and simplification, when I talk about activating a gene by expressing it in different ways, I will refer to turning it on. In reality, genes don't turn on or off. They are activated by chemical signals, and they express themselves in specific ways by making various proteins. Just by changing our thoughts, feelings, emotional reactions, and behaviors, for example, making healthier lifestyle choices with regard to nutrition and stress level, we send our cells new signals, and they express new proteins without changing the genetic blueprint. So while the DNA code stays the same, once a cell is activated in a new way by new information, the cell can create thousands of variations of the same gene. We can signal our genes to rewrite our future. Just as certain areas of the brain are hardwired, whereas other areas are more plastic, able to be changed by learning and experience, I believe genes are the same way. There are certain parts of our genetics that are more easily turned on, while other genetic sequences are somewhat more hardwired, which means they are harder to activate because they have been around longer in our genetic history. At least, that's what science says right now. How do we keep certain genes turned on and others turned off? If we stay in the same toxic state of anger, the same melancholy state of depression, the same vigilant state of anxiety, or the same low state of unworthiness, those redundant chemical signals we have talked about keep pushing the same genetic buttons, which ultimately cause the activation of certain diseases. Stressful emotions, as you will learn, actually pull the genetic trigger, dysregulating the cells. Dysregulation refers to impairment of a physiological regulatory mechanism and creating disease. When we think and feel in the same ways for most of our lives and memorize familiar states of being, our internal chemical state keeps activating the same genes, meaning that we keep making the same proteins. But the body cannot adapt to these repeated demands, and it begins to break down. If we do that for 10 or 20 years, the genes begin to wear out, and they start making cheaper proteins. What do I mean? Think about what happens when we age. Our skin sags because its collagen and elastin come to be made of cheaper proteins. What happens to our muscles? They atrophy. Well, no surprises there. Actin and myosin, too, are proteins. Here's an analogy. When a metal part for your car is manufactured, it is produced in a die or a mold. Each time that mold or die is used, it is subjected to certain forces, including heat and friction, which begin to wear it down. As you can guess, car parts are built to very close tolerances, referring to the permitted variations in a workpiece's dimensions. Over time, that die or mold wears to the point that it produces parts that won't fit properly to other parts. This is similar to what happens to the body. As a result of stress or a habit of being repeatedly and consistently angry, fearful, sad, and so on, the DNA that the peptide uses to produce proteins will start to malfunction. What is the genetic impact if we stay in routine, familiar conditions, creating the same emotional reactions by doing the same things, thinking the same thoughts, seeing the same people, and memorizing our lives into a predictable pattern? We are now headed for an undesirable genetic destiny. We are locked into the same patterns as generations before us, which confronted the same or similar situations. And if we are only reliving our emotional memories of the past, then we are headed for a predictable end. Our bodies will begin to create the same genetic conditions that previous generations faced. Thus, the body will stay the same as long as we are feeling the same way, day in and day out. And if science tells us that it is the environment that signals the genes involved in evolution, what if our environment never changes? What if we've memorized the same conditions in our outer world and we're living by the same thoughts, behaviors, and feelings? What if everything in our lives stays the same? You just learnt that the external environment chemically signals genes through the emotions of an experience. So if the experiences in your life aren't changing, the chemical signals going to your genes aren't changing. No new information from the outer world is reaching your cells. The quantum model asserts that we can signal the body emotionally and begin to alter a chain of genetic events without first having any actual physical experience that correlates to that emotion. We don't need to win the race, the lottery, or the promotion before we experience the emotions of those events. Remember, we can create an emotion by thought alone. We can experience joy or gratitude ahead of the environment to such an extent that the body begins to believe that it is already in that event. As a result, we can signal our genes to make new proteins, to change our bodies, to be ahead of the present environment. Here's an example of how we can signal new genes in new ways when we begin to emotionally embrace an event in the future before it is made manifest. In Japan, a study was conducted to find out what effect one's state of mind might have on disease. The subjects were two groups of patients with type 2 diabetes, all of whom were dependent on insulin. Keep in mind that most diabetics medicate with insulin to remove sugar, glucose, out of the bloodstream and deposit it in the cells where it can be used for energy. At the time of this study, the people involved were being treated with insulin pills or injections to help control their elevated blood sugar levels. Each group had their fasting blood sugar level tested to establish a baseline. Next, one set of subjects watched a comedy show for an hour, while the control group watched a boring lecture. The test subjects then ate a delicious meal, after which their blood glucose levels were checked again. There was a significant discrepancy between the subjects who enjoyed the comedy show and those who viewed the uneventful lecture. On average, those who watched the lecture had their blood sugar levels rise 123 milligrams per deciliter, high enough that they would need to take insulin to keep themselves out of the danger zone. In the joyful group, who had laughed for 1 hour, their after-dinner blood sugar values rose about half that amount, slightly outside of normal range. Initially, the researchers who performed the experiment thought that the light-hearted subjects had lowered their sugar levels by contracting their abdominal and diaphragm muscles when they laughed. They reasoned that when a muscle contracts, it uses energy, and circulating energy is glucose. But the research went further. They examined the gene sequences of the jovial individuals and discovered that these diabetics had altered 23 different gene expressions just by laughing at the comedy show they'd seen. Their elevated state of mind apparently triggered their brains to send new signals to their cells, which turned on those genetic variations that allowed their bodies to naturally begin to regulate the genes responsible for processing blood sugar. Our emotions can turn on some gene sequences and turn off others. This study clearly showed. Just by signaling the body with a new emotion, the laughing subjects altered their internal chemistry to change the expression of their genes. Sometimes a change in genetic expression can be sudden and dramatic. Have you ever heard of people after being subjected to extremely stressful conditions whose hair turned grey overnight? That's an example of genes at work. They experienced such a strong emotional reaction that their altered body chemistry both turned on the gene for the expression of grey hair and shut off the genetic expression for their normal hair color within a matter of hours. They signaled new genes in new ways by emotionally, and thus chemically, altering their internal environment. As I discussed in the last chapter, When you've experienced an event numerous times by mentally rehearsing every aspect of it in your mind, you feel what that event would feel like before it unfolds. Then as you change the circuitry in your brain by thinking in new ways, and you embrace the emotions of an event ahead of its physical manifestation, it's possible that you can change your body genetically. Can you pick a potential from the quantum field? Every potential already exists, by the way, and emotionally embrace a future event before the actual experience. Can you do this so many times that you emotionally condition the body to a new mind, thus signaling new genes in new ways? If you can, it is highly possible that you will begin to shape and mold your brain and body into a new expression, so that they physically change before the desired potential reality is made manifest. We may believe that we can change our brains by thinking, but what effects, if any, will this have on the body? Through the simple process of mentally rehearsing an activity, we can derive great benefits without lifting a finger. Here's an example of how that literally happens. As described in an article published in the 1992 Journal of Neurophysiology, subjects were divided into 3 groups. The first group was asked to exercise by contracting and relaxing one finger of their left hand for 5 one-hour training sessions per week for 4 weeks. A second group mentally rehearsed the same exercises on the same timetable without physically activating any muscle in their finger. People in a control group exercised neither their fingers nor their minds. At the end of the study, the scientists compared the findings. The first set of participants had their finger strength tested against the control group. A no-brainer, right? The group who did the actual exercises exhibited 30% greater finger strength than those in the control group. We all know that if we repeatedly put a load on a muscle, we will increase the strength of that muscle. What we probably wouldn't anticipate is that the group who mentally rehearsed the exercises demonstrated a 22% increase in muscle strength. The mind, then, produced a quantifiable physical effect on the body. In other words, the body changed without having an actual physical experience. Just as researchers have worked with test subjects who mentally rehearsed finger exercises and others who imagined playing piano scales, experiments have compared practical experience versus mental rehearsal for individuals doing bicep curls. The results were the same. Whether the participants physically performed bicep curls or mentally rehearsed those activities, they all increased their bicep strength. The mental exercises, though, demonstrated physiological changes without ever having the physical experience. When the body has changed physically, biologically, to look like an experience has happened just by thought or mental efforts alone, then from a quantum perspective, this offers evidence that the event has already transpired in our reality. If the brain upgrades its hardware to look like the experience physically occurred, and the body is changed genetically or biologically, it's showing evidence that it's happened, and both are different without our doing anything in 3 dimensions, then the event has occurred both in the quantum world of consciousness and in the world of physical reality. When you have thoughtfully rehearsed a future reality until your brain has physically changed to look like it has had the experience, and when you have emotionally embraced a new intention so many times that your body is altered to reflect that it has had the experience, hang on, because this is the moment the event finds you, and it will arrive in a way that you least expect, which leaves no doubt that it came from your relationship to a greater consciousness, so that it inspires you to do it again and again and again. Chapter 4. Overcoming Time. So much has been written about the importance of staying present.
I could cite statistics on everything from distracted driving to divorce to support the notion that people have a really hard time staying in the present moment. Let me add to that body of knowledge by expressing this concept in quantum terms. In the present, all potentials exist simultaneously in the field. When we stay present, we are in the moment. We can move beyond space and time, and we can make any one of those potentials a reality. When we are mired in the past, however, none of those new potentials exist. You've learnt that when human beings try to change, we react much like addicts because we become addicted to our familiar chemical states of being. You know that when you have an addiction, it's almost as if your body has a mind of its own. As past events trigger the same chemical response as the original incident, your body thinks it's re-experiencing the same event. Once conditioned to be the subconscious mind through this process, the body has taken over for the mind. It has become the mind and therefore can, in a sense, think. I just touched upon how the body becomes the mind by the cycle of thinking and feeling and thinking. But there's another way in which this occurs, based on past memories. Here is how it works. You have an experience which has an emotional charge. Then you have a thought about that particular past event. The thought becomes a memory, which then reflexively reproduces the emotion of the experience. If you keep thinking about that memory repeatedly, the thought, the memory, and the emotion merge as one, and you memorize the emotion. Now, living in the past becomes less of a conscious process and more of a subconscious one. Refer Figure 4A, Memorizing Emotions. The subconscious comprises most physical and mental processes that take place below our conscious awareness. Much of its activity is involved in keeping the body functioning. Scientists refer to this regulatory system as the autonomic nervous system. We don't have to consciously think about breathing, keeping our hearts beating, raising and lowering our body temperature, or any other of the millions of processes that help the body maintain order and heal itself. I think that you can see how potentially dangerous it is for us to cede control over our daily emotional responses to our memories and environment, to this automatic system. This subconscious set of routine responses has been variously compared to an autopilot system and to programs running in the background of a computer. What those analogies are trying to convey is the sense that there is something below the surface of our awareness that is in control of how we behave. Here's an example to reinforce these points. Imagine that in your youth you came home one day and discovered your favorite pet lying dead on the floor. Every sensory impression of that experience would be, as the expression goes, burned into your brain. That experience would scar you. With traumatic experiences like that, it's easy to understand how those emotions can become unconscious, memorized responses to reminders from your environment that you lost a loved one. You know by now that when you think of that experience, you create the same emotions in your brain and body as if the event was occurring all over again. All it takes is one stray thought or one reaction to some event in the external world to activate that program, and you start feeling the emotion of your past grief. The trigger could be seeing a dog that looks like yours, or visiting a place you once took him as a puppy. Regardless of the sensory input, it activates an emotion. Those emotional triggers can be obvious or subtle, but they all affect you at a subconscious level. And before you can process what has happened, you're back in that emotional, chemical state of grief, anger, and sadness. Once that happens, the body runs the mind. You can use your conscious mind to try to get out of that emotional state, but invariably you feel like you're out of control. Think of Pavlov and his dogs. In the 1890s, the young Russian scientist strapped a few dogs to a table, rang a bell, and then fed the canines a hearty meal. Over time, after repeatedly exposing the dogs to the same stimulus, he simply rang the bell, and the dogs automatically salivated in anticipation. This is called a conditioned response, and the process occurs automatically. Why? Because the body begins to respond autonomically. Think of your autonomic nervous system. The cascade of chemical reactions that is triggered within moments changes the body physiologically, and it happens quite subconsciously, with little or no conscious effort. This is one of the reasons why it's so hard to change. The conscious mind may be in the present, but the subconscious body mind is living in the past. If we begin to expect a predictable future event to occur in reference to a memory of the past, we are just like those canines. One experience of a particular person or thing at a specific time and place from the past automatically or autonomically causes us to respond physiologically. Once we break the emotional addictions rooted in our past, there will no longer be any pull to cause us to return to the same automatic programs of the old self. It begins to make sense that although we think or believe we are living in the present, there is a good possibility that our bodies are in the past. Unfortunately for most of us, because the brain always works by repetition and association, it doesn't take a major trauma to produce the effects of the body becoming the mind. The most minor triggers can produce emotional responses that feel as though they are beyond our control. For instance, you're driving to work and you stop at your usual coffee shop, which is all out of your favorite hazelnut coffee. Disappointed, you grumble to yourself why a major enterprise like this one can't keep in stock such a very popular flavor. At work, you're irritated to see another car in your preferred parking spot. Stepping into an empty elevator, you are exasperated to discover that someone ahead of you pushed all the buttons. When you finally walk into the office, someone comments, "What's up? You seem kinda down." You tell your story and the person sympathizes. You sum it up. "I'm in a bad mood. I'll get over it." The thing is, you don't. A mood is a chemical state of being, generally short-term, that is an expression of a prolonged emotional reaction. Something in your environment, in this case the failure of your barista to meet your needs, followed by a few other minor annoyances, sets off an emotional response. The chemicals of that emotion don't get used up instantly, so their effect lingers for a while. I call that the refractory period, the time after their initial release until the effect diminishes. The longer the refractory period, obviously, the longer you experience those feelings. When the chemical refractory period of an emotional reaction lasts for hours to days, that's a mood. What happens when that recently triggered mood lingers? You've been in a bit of a funk since that day, and now you look around the room during a staff meeting, and all you can think of is that this person's tie is hideous, and the nasally tone of your boss is worse than nails on a chalkboard. At this point, you're not just in a mood, you're reflecting a temperament, a tendency towards the habitual expression of an emotion through certain behaviors. A temperament is an emotional reaction with a refractory period that lasts from weeks to months. Eventually, if you keep the refractory period of an emotion going for months and years, that tendency turns into a personality trait. At that point, others will describe you as bitter or resentful or angry or judgmental. Our personality traits, then, are frequently based on our past emotions. Most of the time, personality, how we think, act, and feel,
is anchored in the past. So to change our personalities, we have to change the emotions that we memorize. We have to move out of the past. Refer figure 4b. Create different states of being. There is yet another way that we get stuck and keep ourselves from changing. We may also train the body to be the mind in order to live in a predictable future based on the memory of a known past. And thus, we miss the precious now moment again. As you know, we can condition the body to live in the future. Of course, that can be a means to change our lives for the better when we make a conscious choice to focus on a desired new experience, as my daughter did when she created her summer job in Italy. As her story demonstrates, if we focus on an intended future event and then plan how we will prepare or behave, there will be a moment when we are so clear and focused on that possible future that the thoughts we are thinking will begin to become the experience itself. Once the thought becomes the experience, its end product is an emotion. When we begin to experience the emotion of that event ahead of its possible occurrence, the body, as the unconscious mind, begins to respond as though the event is actually unfolding. On the other hand, what happens if we begin to anticipate some unwanted future experience, or even obsess about a worst-case scenario, based on a memory from our past? We are still programming the body to experience a future event before it occurs. Now the body is no longer in the moment or in the past, it's living in the future, but a future based on some construct of the past. When this occurs, the body does not know the difference between the actual event transpiring in reality and what we are entertaining mentally. Because we are priming it to be juiced up for whatever we think might be coming, the body begins to get ready, and in a very real way the body is in the event. Here's an example of living in the future based on the past.